Hey, thank you so much for clicking on the video. My name is Kaylee, and this is Read Rant Review, where, you guessed it, I read books and I do rant reviews. Today, I'm actually going to be doing a rave review, so you get to hear me just like gush in love and try to convince you to read probably one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. Like my probably number one book of, nah, that's a lie. My number two book of 2025. My number one book is This Is How You Lose the Time War, and I already actually have a rave review on that if you're interested. So yeah, I'll be talking about this book just as passionately as I talk about the ones I hate, but I know y'all just love to see a girl be miserable, so I'm sure half y'all are gonna click off this. That's okay. Everybody else, literally, please, 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 I beg of you, you have to read this book, or you have to at least read this series. Sit with me today, hear me out, hear enough of it, and then go read it, come back, have a little book club, okay? I'm so excited. So what are we talking about? I know. What an intro. Today I'm going to be covering Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher. This is book number 1 in the Saint of Steel series. Currently it is a 5-book series. I believe they're planning on doing 7 books total, so we are waiting ever so patiently for the next one. Currently on Goodreads, this is sitting at a 4.07 with just under 45,000 ratings, which is criminal as far as I'm concerned. I'm so mad. In terms of disclaimers and whatnot before I get into the video, the first one that I usually do is let you know that this will contain all of the spoilers. I'll be providing a beat-by-beat, chapter-by-chapter breakdown of the book. So like I said, watch long enough to be convinced to read it on your own and circle back for a book club discussion, or watch this video and then go on to read the rest of the series. So highly encourage that, okay? And I don't say that very often. So my opinion carries a lot of weight if you've seen all the bull crap that I've read on this channel. For me to like something, who is she? The second disclaimer that I put on these is that this review is not for the author. As much as I love T. Kingfisher and I love them as a writer, it's still not for them. And it's not for friends, fans, family, or stans, or anything of the like, right? Just here having a good time. Don't make it weird. And then the third and final disclaimer is usually a content or trigger warning that I like to put on my videos so you know what to expect. There is some general gore and violence, and then our main female character was in a past abusive relationship. There's like infidelity and whatnot that gets talked about, and like he talked down to her quite a bit and like would be, like belittle her, but there's nothing egregious. There's no SA. There's no like nothing between the main characters or anything that's like on page other than the depictions of the infidelity with her past partner. And then, yeah, like I said, just general like gore and violence stuff. I think that's it, to be honest. It's not crazy dark. Turns out you don't have to write a traumatic book to write a good book. I say traumatic, and the guy's god literally dies. So, without further ado, Chapter 1, Paladin's Grace. Stephen's god died a little after noon on the longest day of the year. The Saint of Steel had not been a major deity, but neither had he been entirely obscure. He had 4 temples staffed with priests and paladins, and the bishop of his church sat on the council in Arkan's glory beside the elders of the other local churches, the Forge God and the Four-Faced God, and the Temple of the White Rat. His paladins, Stephen among them, rode out when the saint's duty demanded swords and men to wield them, and rode back to the temple nursing their wounds, only to ride out again when they had healed. It never occurred to Stephen or any of the others that a god could die. Such things happened in mythology, not in real life. And so they were returning from like this long, grim journey that they had of hunting demons with a couple of the other like people from the other temples and whatnot. And on the way back, Stephen gets this like horrible feeling in his chest, and he just like feels his god die. Everybody that was like god touched or that had this like special connection with the god loses their freaking minds. Some of them pass out, some of them like pretty much go into a coma and never wake up. The other ones literally go insane. One of them like sets the church on fire. The paladins, which in case you were like unaware of the difference between a paladin and a knight, knights are sworn to their like quote unquote lords, so more like the kings or the kingdom. Paladins are sworn to like a deity or a god. In this case, they're sworn to the Saint of Steel. And the paladins go into like a berserker rage. And so when they go like crazy super Saiyan, like killer mode, the Saint of Steel would like guide them on who to kill, and he would protect all the innocent people. And so it was like this controlled chaos. And that was one of the unique things about the Saint of Steel paladins. But when the god dies, the god's not there to, direct this uncontrollable fury. And so the paladins go on a rampage, and some of them end up like killing people. Stephen tried to kill the people around him that were otherwise like good friends of his, that they had like fought arm in arm, but they all went crazy after this thing happened. This absolutely traumatic opening to this book. The saint is dead. In chapter 2, it is 3 years later, and after all of this chaos, only 7 paladins survived. Everybody else, like I said, went into a coma, like never woke up, or they like ended their own lives. And the 7 remaining were taken in by the Temple of the White Rat. The Temple of the White Rat was filled with clerks and clerics moving back and forth, hundreds of people solving small practical problems, and occasionally even the large and intractable ones. The rat's priests fixed things that could be fixed, and when things were broken past all mending, they helped people pick up the pieces. So altogether, these are like the lawyers and the representatives and the do-gooders of the world. Like if you need anything, if something is awry and you need assistance, the Temple of the White Rat is there to help. And so they took in the paladins. The Temple of the White Rat does not have their own like army or swordsmen or anything like that. And so essentially these 7 got adopted to kind of be like not bodyguards, but to just stand around and look intimidating whenever they needed it. And obviously these 7 survivors are depressed, not taking it very well, understandably so, Stephen in particular. And so chapter 2 is really just kind of talking about him kind of going through these motions and where they have found as much peace as they possibly could. In chapter 3, Stephen has been tasked to escort a healer around the city. Not that it's needed, it's more of just so people know, right, that he has protection, but it's generally a safe town for the most part. There's this one area called Weaver's Nest where there has been somebody going around decapitating people and leaving the heads behind, and then the bodies are just like gone somewhere, just mysteriously. They have no idea where these bodies are going. They have no idea who's doing it. And the crime is particularly happening in Weaver's Nest, which is like the most impoverished area. And so it's been hard. I mean, dude, even in these freaking fantasy novels, you can't escape like classism. And so it's kind of put there's a police force, and they're like dedicated to solving these crimes, and they're not really given the full resources and focus, right, to be getting after these decapitated people until obviously eventually it impacts somebody rich. You know how it goes. You literally just can't even escape it in a freaking book, but we're not going there. So the healer at first refuses to have Stephen guide him along because he's like, everybody knows me, they're not going to hurt me. And Stephen is talking about how he's gonna get gray hair because nobody's taking these decapitations seriously. But eventually, obviously, he does accept Stephen, and they end up talking. Like the healer asks him about losing his god and if he's a danger, and you start to get the feeling real quick about how bad Stephen feels and how much he feels that he is like a danger to society and he can't be trusted, and how at like any moment he could go into this like a berserker fit and hurt a bunch of people around him. And because he doesn't have like the god's hand guiding him in this, that is like his number one fear, is that he's going to be around people and then just end up like hurting everybody. And it's actually so sad. Like the monologue, like the internal dialogue and whatnot of this character, of this main male character, is, I think, so unique in an interesting way, that again we'll continue to unpack as I read more and more quotes from him, and you'll start to pick it up. But it's just very self-reflective and like self-deprecating in an interesting way. But he's following this healer around town, right? They're visiting all these different folks. The final visit lasted quite a while, and there was no one around to help distract him. So Stephen opened his pack and pulled out his needles and a thick ball of yarn. Knitting socks was not a particularly glamorous hobby, but it filled the same mental need as the sword. Careful work that held his attention and hopefully did not allow his mind to wander too far afield. Plus, at the end, you got socks out of it. and no one appreciated good socks like a soldier. So you're telling me we have a big, sad, honorable man who knits socks, and you expect me not to fall in love with him immediately? I love him. I'm literally so obsessed with him. In chapter 4, the very, very last visit of the night, they make one final stop. This lady is not doing well. Like, she's going to pass at some point during the night. And so the healer dismisses Stephen, and Stephen's like, okay, cool. Well, if something happens, can you please at least stay in the house until daylight, and I'll come and get you first thing in the morning. Like, I don't want you walking home in the middle of the night. Healer pushes back. Stephen pushes back even more, and he eventually agrees to this. And the Brother Francis is his name. As he's dismissing Stephen, and Stephen asks if he can do anything to help, Brother Francis shook his head. If we could fight sickness with swords, even I might take up the blade, he sighed. No, the fact is, Paladin, that we healers like to believe that we make a difference when it comes to illness. But when it comes to illness, the patient will usually live or die regardless of what we do. If we are lucky, we do not make it any worse. But it is a comfort to the families to know that we are there. So I will sit with this poor woman and bear witness to her fight, however it ends. And again, just like the nobility of it all, I just love it so much. And he's making his way back to the temple, just kind of trekking through, and suddenly he hears running footsteps. There are many kinds of running footsteps, of course. Panicked flight, hot pursuit, and many shades in between. The hunter always sounds different than the hunted, because the hunted is looking over their shoulder while they run. These were the hunted footsteps. Stephen turned, seeing a dark shadow in the mouth of the alley, and then the shadow was rushing toward him. He grabbed for his sword, cursing the inattention that left him vulnerable, and the shadow threw herself, into his arms. Hide me. In chapter 5, Stephen suddenly finds himself in the arms of a woman who is desperately running from something. She grabs him and tries to tilt him so that he's blocking the mouth of the alleyway, and he doesn't really understand what's happening until he turns and sees 2 figures approaching in indigo cloaks. These are 2 servants of the Hanged Mother. She is one of the other gods. This is one of the other religious orders. And the Hanged Mother people are crazy. Obviously, if you can imagine, with a god name like the Hanged Mother, they're just very violent, very much don't really care for the law, don't really care for whatever. And if they can get away with it, they will, in fact, off you at any chance that they can get. They're just very grumpy, crappy, rude kind of people. And so Stephen realizes, well, the best thing that he can do is, he says, keep your head down, he muttered, and moved so that she was up against the wall of the alley, and his cloak covered both of them. The scent of sage and lavender rose from her hair. He felt a pang of guilt for what he was about to do, but it was a vast improvement over anything that the motherhood was likely to do to her. And so the men call out and ask if he has seen a woman. Stephen turned his head and gave the man a slow, hopefully lascivious smile. I'm seeing one right now. He called back and bucked his hips a few times, pressing her farther against the wall. I'm so very sorry, ma'am, he said under his breath. It's so funny to me. He's he keeps calling back to these guys about hooking up with this girl, and then he's like, yeah, man, it's so hot. I'm so sorry I have to do this to you. Yeah, this is crazy. It's I don't know why it's so freaking hilarious to me. And so she sees what he's doing, and so she tries to play along with it, and she's pretending to, be getting it on, and she's making noises, and he's like, oh my God, please, my ears, because she's just squealing almost, not believable noises, and she's pumping her legs. He describes it as though she was a child pumping on a swing. I was like, oh my God. So he is doesn't really know what to do right now. Obviously, he has this beautiful woman in his arms. However, there's just a lot of awkwardness happening, and the motherhood's right there, and it's just a lot. So eventually the guys do turn around, though. They go to leave. He puts her down, and he then is like, okay, well, can I at least walk you home then, I guess? This is ridiculous. So after the motherhood leaves, he puts her down. She says, thank you. He apologizes for the liberties. And she says, don't be absurd. I was the one taking liberties with you. You saved my life. And he offers to escort her home. And she says, are you really a paladin? You've got the cloak, but I wasn't sure. I was. Now that my god's dead, I am a paladin of no one in particular. And now she knows exactly what I am. He He braced himself for her to flinch and step back, as if he might run mad at any moment, but instead her face cleared and she reached out a hand and took his elbow. Either she is extremely sheltered, or she banged her head while she was attempting to climb me like a tree. Either way, chivalry demanded that he come to her assistance. He just wasn't used to people looking at him as if he wasn't a pariah. Other than the Rat's servants, of course, and that may simply be because they would work with any member of pariahs if it would solve problems. She says that her shop is in Glover's Quarter, which is like a couple neighborhoods away. And so they end up talking about like, what the heck are you doing all the way over here? Like, why are you in this area? And she was going to the cemetery on the outside of town to collect some flowers. Don't worry, she has a deal with the keeper of the graveyard. She's not just being some like creepy weirdo about it. But she collects flowers because she is a perfumer. She makes perfumes, which is such an interesting like career specialty. What would you call it? You know what I mean? It's a cool job to have. I feel like I've never read about that in a book before. And so she ends up talking about all of these smell goods and how she collects this particular flower because it's a good base note. And they end up having this very detailed discussion about smells, and he's just very interested in it. And they crack a couple jokes and just are talking away. And it's very, very cute. And as they get closer, she says, this should be close enough. She said at last, as they emerged from an alley onto the larger street. Unlike the ones controlled by the Scarlet Guild, trash had piled up around the edges. Stephen's eyes drew close together. Are you certain? I have lived here for several years, she said, unthreading her arm from his. It's no trouble to walk you the rest of the way. He tried his best for a winning smile. I used to know how to smile at women, he's thinking. I hate to leave a rescue only half finished. It was the wrong thing to say. Her gray-green eyes chilled. I'm afraid that I do not require further rescue, but thank you. I apologize, madam. He shook his head, feeling his smile turn rueful. I just put my foot in it, didn't I? A long pause, and then either she took pity on him or the awkwardness of the situation bothered her as well. It's not you. If I go in at this hour with a man, the woman who lives in the shop next door will begin shouting about sins of the flesh at me. And they say goodbye, and he goes on about his way, and then he realizes that she never even told him her name. Oh my God. We go into chapter 6. Now we're talking about Grace. It's not really Grace's POV, but, you know, kind of like we have it focused on each of the characters. You know what I'm saying? So now we begin to focus this chapter on Grace and her experience. And it has been a week, and she has not been able to get this Paladin out of her mind. She can't remember very much about him other than the fact that he smelled like gingerbread and that he had these like really, really gorgeous blue eyes. And she has been racking her brain all week about why this grown man would smell like gingerbread. Literally has been driving her crazy. Could it have been something in the armor? His armor had smelled faintly of frankincense and even more faintly of lanolin, but that was because of the oil that they used on the metal. Everybody in armor smelled something like that, and you could tell how much money that somebody was willing to spend by exactly how much they smelled of sheep. In Inukit City, where Grace used to live, Grace had been able to estimate the rank of military officers by what scent they added to the oil. Everyone used clove oil and chalk on their weapons, but only the highest ranks could afford clove oil for their armor as well. As he moved down the ranks, the oils got cheaper and stronger. Rank and file got nothing but lanolin, and in the wet season they smelled like a flock of sheep. Frankincense was mostly reserved for holy orders. Grace couldn't think of anything that would make oiled metals smell like gingerbread, but the gods knew she didn't know every single smell in the world. She wondered if she could blend a mixture that would be masculine but with gingerbread notes. And she's just like going down this whole thing. Oh, maybe we could do like a sandalwood base, and like what if there was cedar was one of them? And it's the thought spiral into all of these different scents is how you tell me that this person is incredibly passionate and intelligent about their job without telling me that this person is incredibly intelligent. We run into this quite a bit in quite a bit of the books that we cover on this channel, where we'll just be told that the main character is so smart or so about their job, and they're like obsessed with it and like, oh my God. But in this book, it literally is her entire life, and it's all she talks about and thinks about, and is constantly like trying to like pinpoint what different smells are. It's like genuinely so interesting, and I thought it was fascinating. I've never really thought about perfume in any type of way until I read this book, to be frank. I thought it was so cool. But she's working in the shop, and at last her eyes settle on her prized possession, an ancient leather-bound journal written by a man who didn't know if he wanted to be an alchemist, a cosmetologist, or an herbalist. The perfumer who had taken her in as an apprentice when she was 9 had given it to her. Well, not given exactly. Threw it at my head while shouting, useless as you are, but who's quibbling? He'd never been able to make sense of the thing, but Grace had kept trying, deciphering and the crabbed handwriting and the absurd alchemic notation by candlelight until she could unlock the secrets within its pages. But she's never been able to, and so she kind of almost uses it as like not like a fortune teller thing, but whenever she's just needing guidance in life, she'll just open to like a random page and look at it and see if the book will tell her something. So this particular time she pops it open and she's like, okay, book, let's see what you think about the Paladin. She closes her eyes, opens it, goes to a paragraph that says, the black milk of the virgin beyond the grave, simmered in a dung heap under a magnetic field for 33 1/3 days, will turn into a homunculus red in color, which may be fed on, well, that was helpful, she told the book. Okay. And then in the middle of this, her landlord and her best friend, Margarite, walks in. Margarite is a spy, and she was very open with Grace about this when Grace had moved in. They talk about, kind of what's going on in the world and what they've been up to lately, and Grace asks for more information about these paladins, because she's just so curious, about like when they came here, what exactly happened, how many of them are there. And Marguerite is like, why are you taking such a special interest in this? What is going on here? And so Grace ends up telling her about this, experience that she had with our boy, Stephen. And so Marguerite says, oh, I'll find him. Don't you worry. But literally all she knows is that he had blue eyes and that he was tall. She's like, okay, I'll see what I can work with. We got this. Okay, cool. But Grace is like, why are you doing this? Why are you going to try and find him? And she says, I could say it's because this is the first man that you've expressed even the faintest interest in as long as I've known you. He is not, Grace protested. Wait, is he? Yep. Marguerite poked her in the collarbone with one of her elegantly manicured fingers. I pay attention to these things, and when you talk about him, your voice goes all wistful. I've never been wistful a day in my life. Grace had no idea what being wistful entailed, but she was pretty sure that you had to be younger and thinner and possibly have consumption, which again is just so funny. And so we have a chapter break and we shift to what Stephen is doing, and he's in a similar situation where he told his little paladin buddies about Grace because he's been in such a good mood. And so they clock it and they ask him what's going on. He tells them about this encounter with Grace, and they're like, okay, dude, literally go and find her. What are you doing? Like, do you really need the gods to send you a signed invitation? It seems that they've dropped a rock in your head from a great height and you still do not see it. It wasn't like that, protested Stephen, and it doesn't mean anything. She might be married with 6 kids. She might not even like men. He hadn't gotten that impression, but one never knew. 6 kids is workable. A live husband? Well, why was he letting her chase through graveyards in the dark without assistance? Clearly unfit for such a woman. Istvan nodded to himself. We'll have him killed. We're paladins, Istvan. We don't have people killed unless they're evil. To leave such a woman in the clutches of the motherhood and her 6 kids at home to care for? Bah, clearly an evil man. Stephen put his forehead down on the table and moaned softly. We'll make inquiries, said Istvan. There cannot be many perfume makers in the city. I love like a one-time meeting and like not being able to forget each other and like being your friends bullying the shit out of you to go and find them. It's genuinely so cute. In chapter 8, we cut back to Grace and Marguerite and what they're up to. Grace is checking one of the new batches of like oil that she received from her supplier and realizes that they put cheap stuff in it. And she's upset that they thought that they could like rip her off in such a way, but doesn't want to be confrontational. And this is like a very defining characteristic of hers where she is very, very non-confrontational, like at all. God bless this woman, right? And so instead, she's like, yeah, I'll just tell him that, he needs to check with his supplier where he got it from because there must be, something went wrong with this batch. And she's like, hopefully I can just shame him into doing the right thing. And Marguerite is in the middle of talking to her about some other stuff. She's not clocking it at all because now she's in her head and she's thinking about her ex-husband. And we kind of get it, again, like slowly fed to us throughout the book of how crappy this relationship with her husband was. And it just bad. Dude just completely like degraded her and did not respect her in any type of way. And so she gets these like flashback memory states where that's like all she can think about is this particular instance that she's reminded of. And so she's in the middle of one of those as Margarite is talking to her. She snaps back, and it turns out Margarite is telling her that she needs to make a special perfume for the prince. Crown Prince of Charlock is coming for a state visit. It's a big deal. They're looking for a trading partner, and the Arkan is trying to convince them that Arkenhold would be a better choice than Anukit City. So there will be a formal presentation of gifts to the Crown Prince from the city's artisans, and I need you to make something elegant to give to the prince. And you also have to come to it. Having you, and thus me as your representative, in Arkan's good graces is far more useful to me than some merchants in Anukit City, improving their profit margin by a percentage or two. Besides, if Arkenhold becomes more powerful, I become more essential to the Anukit spy masters. A woman has to look out for her own interests sometimes. And Grace is concerned about this because there will be representatives from Anukit City, which is where she ran away from 3 years ago. That's how she came to Arkenhold, was she went on the lam, pretty much, from her previous relationship. And so she's worried about going to this. And Margarite reassures her, like, don't worry, you're going to be the eccentric perfumer. We'll get you all dolled up, and we'll give you, stuff to, like, cover up, and you won't have to talk at all. So you don't have to worry about that. You're not going to speak in public. I'll speak on your behalf, and, like, we'll make sure you have somewhat of, like, a disguise, okay? She doesn't really have a choice. So it is what it is. And we cut to Stephen, and he has been tasked as a honor guard for Bishop Beartongue. Bishop Beartongue is like one of the highest ranking members of the Temple of the White Rat. And the reason Stephen, Shane, and Istvan, oh, I'm going to mess up his name a lot, and Istvan were selected for this honor guard because they're the only paladins with beards. And one of the like tenets or whatever of the religion that the Prince of Charlock has, I guess their version of the devil is called like the beard or the hairless devil. And so they are instantly more trustworthy of men that have beards. So that's why they got chosen for this. And so chapter 8 is just the four of them, right? Beartongue, Shane, Istvan, and Stephen going to this event and getting situated. They're in their honor guard positions, kind of BSing with the bishop and how cool she is. And it's very fun. Get a little bit more kind of like political background about how all these different towns interact and the trading partners and some kind of weird. It's very, very clear that there's some like favoritism between the different cities and whatnot. So again, just a bunch of like political stuff that does become more relevant throughout the other books. So again, I recommend you read it if you want to continue. But just in general, just know that there's some royalty, tradesman, political bull crap that's happening right now. The only thing to note is that when the Hanged Mother walks in and they see those guards, there's one with them that is particularly young and just looks sick. And so the guys are all talking about how when they had their first honor guards and they had their first jobs and just how squeamish he looks, and they just like reflect on the old days back when they were that young. I'm pretty sure they're like Steven's 37, and I think Shade and the other one are like around the same age, if not a little bit older. And Grace is 32, by the way. I did not say their names and stuff or their ages earlier. We're talking all grown folk here. Oh my God, what is that about? While they're there doing that, chapter 9, we cut back over to Grace and Margarite getting ready. She's getting her all dolled up. And like I said, gives her a little handkerchief to conceal her face. And they'll tell the story that because she is this master perfumer, she has a very, very sensitive nose. And she's going to have these like beans things under the handkerchief that she can smell. And she'll hold the handkerchief up to her nose and her mouth the entire time because her sensitive nose, right? Again, eccentric, artisan. So they're just going to kind of ham it up so she'll be able to cover her face the whole time. Back to Stephen, though. He is bored out of his mind, standing guard at this, political affair thing, just hanging out. And he wished that he could break out his knitting, but for some reason, people didn't take you seriously as a warrior when you were knitting. He'd never figured out why. Making socks required 4 or 5 double-ended bone needles, and while they weren't very large, you could probably jam one into someone's eye if you really wanted to. Not that he would. He'd have to pull out the needle out of the sock, and then he'd be left with the grimly fiddly work of rethreading the stitches, and also washing blood out of wool was possible, but a pain. Still, if he had to suddenly pull out his sword and fend off an attack, there was a chance that he'd drop the yarn, and since he'd be feeling masochistic, and was using 2 colors for this current set of socks, there was absolutely no chance that the yarn wouldn't get tangled, and then he'd be trying to murder people while chasing yarn around, and God forbid, the tie tide rose and he went berserk. You never got the knitting untangled after that. You usually just had to throw it away completely. It's literally so cute. And then the guys are all talking about what they would use for weapons around the room. You know, using like, some people have like stuffed gooses on their hats, or they could use the ice swan if they like broke the neck off the ice sculpture and use that as a weapon, or this like you know, get something from the chandelier. Just like going through this like whole list of like scenarios of what they could possibly do. This finally comes to an end when it is announced that the prince is ready for the craftsmen to begin presenting their gifts, which means Margarite and Grace go up there to give the perfume to the prince. It goes so well that the prince calls calls Grace forward to him to apply the perfume directly onto his wrist. She does. He enjoys it. She gets whisked away. She felt like she was like blacking out all under pressure, but it objectively went very, very well. They give their gift. They go off to the side, and Margarite says that she'll go and get her a drink so that they can like celebrate and relax a little bit. And then Grace is just like standing there, and she's like, okay, whew, that was a lot. This is a lot. It's really, really hot in here. There's a lot of people. I'm really freaking out. And she's like all in her head about how wrong this is and how somebody's going to recognize her. And she's like spiraling out of control. God bless this woman. I've never related to somebody so hard. And so in chapter 11, when we go back to Stephen's point of view, he's watching this whole thing, and all he can think about is how much that he just wants to rip the prince's like arm off because he made Grace uncomfortable. You know, again, she was nervous, right? It wasn't really the prince's fault. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but you know, Stephen he could sense he was making her feel bad, and so he just wanted to harm him. But obviously that is not a choice. And so his buddies like sense the tension, right? They've all fought together long enough to know when there's some weird shift in the air. And so they look over at Stephen and they're like, what's up? He's like, that's the girl. That's the one. And they're like, dude, get out of here. What are you doing? And then eventually Bishop Beartongue dismisses him, like completely just says, dude, get lost. Seriously, like go talk to her. And he's like, ma'am, I'm literally working. And he doesn't want to go until Shane, one of the paladins, until his paladin brother, Shane, says, looks like she's about to pass out. And so he makes his way over there as quickly as he can. In Grace, like I said, we cut back to her, and she is not doing well. She's already kind of on the edge of everything and how hot it is and how like stuffy everything is when she hears a very, very familiar voice. This is the voice of a woman named Lady Vance, which was one of her ex-husband's affair partners. Ugh. So this triggers a memory that goes on for the rest of the paragraph where she is remembering where Lady Vance like revealed to her about how good of a lover her husband was. It's a whole thing. I felt so bad for her. It's tragic. And so she ends up coming out of this like memory state when she smells gingerbread. And she comes to, and she's in Stephen's arms, and he says, we meet again. In chapter 12, his, like, you know, telling it from his point of view, he's saying, we meet again, said Stephen, and immediately thought, well, that was an incredibly stupid thing to say. He'd moved as soon as Shane pointed her out, but he hadn't been able to run. When a man in armor runs in a crowd, people tend to scream and get out of the way. The bishop would have had words, so he walked with what felt like agonizing slowness, watching her head slowly sunk forward, thinking, let me get there in time. Just let me get there in time. Please, gods, let me get there in time. And so he does. He grabs her by the shoulders. He's trying to find an exit. One of the forged god priests spots him, and he like kind of pats him on the side, and he's like, yeah, just go behind that over there. You'll get to the hallway where the bathrooms are. They get out there into the hallway where it's a lot cooler, and she comes to, and they have this moment where he's like holding her close to him, and he's like, there's a pulse beating in her throat, and he could picture very clearly covering her mouth with his, kissing the color back into her lips, and then sliding down her jaw and feeling her heart race under her skin. Stop. You don't get to have these thoughts. And even if you have them, women like this do not have such thoughts about men like you. Stephen released her shoulders and stepped back, still keeping his hands on her upper arms in case she was less steady than she seemed. She shook herself and took a step back of her own, rubbing her hands over her forearms. But they are so into each other. So she's okay. You know, he's asking if her assistant will be looking for her. And of course, like magic, Margarite appears. And she's like, okay, yeah, hey, we can go now. And Grace says we can't go that way. Like, she doesn't want to walk in front of Lady Vance. She doesn't want to get recognized. Because again, right, she ran away. So her husband presumably has no idea that she's in Arkenhold. So she's terrified. And also it's just all traumatic anyway. So she doesn't want to go that way. Luckily, Stephen kind of realizes where they are in terms of like castle layout or like wherever the heck they are, about like how they could get out of there. He says, yeah, I think if we go down this hallway, we should end up like wrapping around behind where the prince sits. And then there should be guards back there. So we can ask them how to get out. And then they should be willing to help us out. So, okay, great. It's a good plan and all. And until they turn the corner and find the guard dead and a young man next to said dead body, curled up, crying and looking at them and saying that he didn't do it. Uh-oh. It turns out that this young man is the same one that was working for the motherhood, that was like one of the guards that was with the motherhood's person. However, he is no longer wearing that cloak. He is dressed as someone else and obviously trying to do an assassination. And he says, no, it's not like that. I wasn't actually going to kill the guy. I wasn't actually supposed to kill anybody. Oh my goodness. He's very sweaty. He's not looking very great. And Stephen kneels down next to him and he tries to use the voice. This is something that the dreaming gods servants have. The paladins try to use it, and it's like the voice of every, father, brother, like father type figure voice, where all you can do is just like listen and like believe what they're saying. And they try to convince you. And so he's trying to like soothe the boy. And the boy realizes, looking down at his uniform, that he works for he works for the Temple of the White Rat. Well, he says you're one of the heretics that work for the Temple of the White Rat, right? Because he's still wearing the outfit and the uniform for the Saints of Steel, or for the Saint of Steel. So the boy, in response to this realization, grabs a thing out of his pocket. It's a glass capsule and pops it in his mouth. And it's poison to end his own life. Not great. Stephen tells Margarite to go and get help, and Margarite says, we can't. He was dead the second that he bit down on that glass. Turns out it's with like pufferfish poison or something that's like pretty instant, but it's not in this case. And so this boy ends up suffering this like really horrific death that lasts a couple of minutes. And Stephen is just there like soothing him and talking him through it and trying to comfort him. Once the boy is actually dead and they stand up and stuff, and Grace is sitting there feeling guilty because she couldn't bear to like look at him and witness what happened. Margarite is digging through his pockets. And Stephen is like, okay, what the frick is happening? And she says that an assassin as incompetent as he was bound to have evidence on him. She's briskly checking the corpse with practiced ease. She lifted his hand forward and his fingertips had gone red-violet, probably from the poison. She relieved him of a signet ring, muttering, and then pulled a sheath of papers out of his vest, flipped through them, and shook her head. The gods have mercy. Evidence? Asked Grace. Too much and the wrong kind. She glanced at Stephen. I'm taking these. And he says, are you? And they have a little bit of a standoff. And Grace intervenes in the middle of it. And she's like, hey, she's on our side. Like, we're fighting the same fight. Okay, guys? Like, we need to chill out. Stephen believes her. He agrees. And Margarite and Grace go to leave. And then Stephen stands there for like another minute or two before he bangs on the door behind the prince's like chair, basically to alert the guards that there was this like dead kid. Okay. Crazy escalation, right? And they don't understand why this kid would do this, what the hell this assassination attempt was, how this went so sideways. It's incredibly messy. And Stephen and Margarite like cannot piece together why this would even be happening. In chapter 14, Stephen notifies the guards. Obviously, there's a lot of questioning. Everybody kind of got pulled aside and the party got ruined and whatnot. And then they're on the carriage ride back. The other paladins, and Bishop Beartongue, are on the way back home. And he's getting them caught up on exactly what happened. And they're talking through it of like, well, could it have been one of theirs? Like, why would the motherhood want to assassinate the Archon, or fail to assassinate the Archon? He practically lives in his hip pocket. And they're like, well, unless it was an attempted, like they knew it was going to fail so that the motherhood could save him and then be even in more like good graces with the Archon or something, or, maybe, I don't know. Like, again, there's still just like so much confusion about what is going on. But now the biggest question is what the paperwork was and what this ring was that Margarite had taken off of the boy. And so Bishop Beartongue tasks Stephen with going back and talking to the women and figuring out what exactly happened. And he pushes back. He's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not trained in any of this. Like, you have lawyers and all these other people. And she says, well, I don't really care. You have a relationship with them. They already know you. You need to go and talk to them. And also, there's a little bit of like wink, wink, nod, nod. you need to go talk to this lady type of thing, you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of helping out, you know what I'm saying, that's happening. So they go to the temple for the night. And in the following morning, in chapter 15, Grace wakes up a little bit before noon, and she goes downstairs to start working. And all of a sudden, she hears somebody clear their throat, and it's Stephen just sitting in the shop, hanging out, knitting, waiting for her. And he tells her that the door was open, and so he came in, but he could hear her snoring and didn't want to interrupt. She's like, I know that I locked the door. And he's like, well, I don't know. He's like, I don't even know if I took my shoes off last night. It was very chaotic yesterday. And she's like, no, internally, she's thinking, she's like, I always lock the door. And I don't know how I can explain that to a stranger, that this is my place and I would never let anyone in here. Like, it's important to me to always keep that door locked. Like, this is kind of weird. And then they get, distracted and they end up moving on from that train of thought. And part of the train of thought, though, that she's going down is like, the reason she locks the door is because she has no one on her side, and how the only people that she does have on her side are her cat and Margarite. And she wondered if the Paladin thought that he was on her side too. Her first response to this thought was a rush of warmth, which was then smothered almost immediately by irritation. A knight in shining armor rides to the rescue of the helpless maiden again. Damn it to hell. Rescue is bad. People who wanted you to be vulnerable and grateful tended to get very angry when you stopped being vulnerable and didn't act grateful enough. And so with that thought, she tells him, and she's like, hey, last night I know I was indisposed, right? We had the moment we like almost kissed, and it was kind of this like, closeness where he had rescued her from fainting. She says, but Marguerite could have helped me and I didn't need rescuing. I mean, I'm very grateful for your help. It was very kind, but I don't want you to think that and then he's like, I'm actually here about the papers that your friend took from the dead boy. She told me to come by here today. Grace was glad that he was looking at the ceiling because she could feel the blood in her cheeks, and she knew that she turned beet red. Of course, that's why he's here. What were you thinking? He wasn't here for you. He watched a man die in front of you last night. How egotistical are you that you think a paladin would come here for any reason other than that? And they're just like so awkward, and they're so bad at like talking to each other. And it's the insecurity that these two have of like, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, they would never want me, and both of them feeling that way, and just this like awkward tension interaction between the two of them. I'm kicking my feet the entire time. So they end up, she doesn't know when Marguerite is coming back, and so she's just going to go on about working and like making a bunch of, her normal perfume stuff. And he's like, okay, well, if you don't mind, I'll just, sit here and just keep knitting until she returns. And so they fall into this really like companionable, would that be the word? Friendly, casual, comfortable silence, and they both just keep working. Just the occasional clicking of the needles or the glass, or when he drinks his tea and puts it down, just these little soft noises. Her turning a page, turning on a burner, just the clicks and the silence of just working in tandem, of just working in the same space. It's so wholesome. It's so cute. In chapter 16, Marguerite eventually comes in. Neither of them hear it, so they don't know how long she was just standing there, just watching them kind of working and keeping little peeks at each other the whole time. So the evidence, though, was a signet ring in these papers. This is the marker, the signet ring, for Anuket City's Senate. If you have this ring, you are allowed to go into the Senate building, and it can be used to place letters under official seal. They are easy to come by and easy to forge, and I suspect I don't need to tell you that they're not the sort of thing that an assassin wears to work. Okay, and it didn't fit him either, did it? It did not. And Stephen's like, oh, wow, she's not even hiding the fact that she's a spy. This is kind of interesting. So he takes off his gloves and he picks up the papers and he's reading through it. And he straight up just asks if she works for Anuket City. And she says she works for whoever, pretty much like whoever pays, like whoever, needs the assistance that she's willing to do. And so he's reading through the papers and he's like, wow, this is like really incriminating. And she said, yeah, almost to parody. Nobody gives assassins contracts in writing like that. Like, this is really, really weird. Like, this whole situation is weird. It should be in coded language. It should be whatever. It's like they're setting it up. It was a motherhood person with all this Anuket City stuff. It kind of sounds like they're trying to, some shenanigans is afoot that they really can't quite put their finger on. And with all that information, he goes back to the temple to report back to his people. And Grace goes on about working and again, just feeling incredibly awkward about everything that happened. And Stephen, on his way back, he's just thinking, and Stephen, when he's back at the temple, he's like laying in bed just staring at the ceiling, and he's thinking about her saying that I don't need you to keep rescuing me. What if I don't want to rescue you? What if I want to talk to you because you make me laugh and you live in a jumble of vials and papers and with a good-natured weasel, it's like a weasel cat thing pet that she has, and do interesting things? Fine. He had rescued her twice. It was a habit you got into when you were a paladin. It was the job. It wasn't like he meant to keep doing that. And so he's thinking about seeing her in her dressing gown, like when she had first come downstairs, and how much he wanted to, see some more of that. But it wasn't a good idea. It would get complicated. Lust was too close to passion, and passion was much too dangerous when you were basically a berserker fit looking for a place to happen. Not a good idea at all. And it would have been, for example, a supremely bad idea to step forward and put his face against her hair to see if it smelled like cedar, and then to slide his hand down past the neck of her dressing gown and around the curve of her breast. Terrible idea. Yes, quite terrible. He examined the idea carefully from all angles to make sure that he was aware of just how terrible it was. His body had definite opinions about the quality of this idea. Stephen had to adjust the blankets. And that's kind of how the spice is talked about through the book, where it's just this you know what I mean? Hinted at, innuendo-y, that isn't just this flagrant, direct, graphic smut, which I actually very much appreciated. Not being subjected to just straight craziness. But anyway, he's again just beating himself up over having these thoughts of her and thinking about how rescuing people and doing all this stuff, that's his job. Half of the paladin's rule for the Saint of Steel. My duty is to serve. I will be the sword and shield for the weak against the strong. I will be a symbol for those who require hope. I will bear the burdens for those who cannot bear them. The rule and the battle tide, those were the two things that made the saints paladins, or had in years before the god had died. Now, well, the rule was still there and the tide, but you followed one and hoped like hell not to wake the other. The scent of ginger and saffron wafted his nostrils again. And again, it's every time he's trying to remember all these saintly, godly things, he just keeps thinking of Grace, and he's just very, very torn up about this. And so he, in chapter 18, is telling Beartongue about everything, the information that he got, and she ends up tasking him to continue, just stay close to Margarite. We're not going to look into it. She's being advised by another assassin that she ended up hiring, Bishop Beartongue hired, to give some perspective maybe on the situation and what's going on. And ultimately they decide that they're just going to lay back because they didn't want to kick the hornet's nest of whatever could possibly be happening over there. So instead, she tasks Stephen with just staying engaged with Grace and Margarite and wait and see what happens. And he's I don't know if you should, trust me. I don't know if I trust my own judgment with any of this. I don't really know what I'm doing. And the bishop says, yes, well, at least you're aware of it. Give me one man who's old enough to know his limits over a dozen who don't. Damn, okay. And so that's the plan. In chapter 19, it rained buckets. Just completely flooding out everything in the city. And so on this day, he goes to visit Grace, right? It's pouring, he's dripping water everywhere. There's no business in the shop at all because everybody's literally underwater. And he's there because Margarite had sent a message to meet her there. And he tells Grace this, and she's a little disappointed. And then Stephen says, oh, well, also, I have this for you. Since I started them here, I figured, And he hands her a pair of socks that he started knitting the other morning. He made her socks. And she's so flattered by this. This is the best gift that she's ever gotten. It's the first thing that somebody's ever made for her. And who could say no to some warm socks? You know what I mean? And so they end up making small talk, and he asks her about how she started working as, a perfumer. How did you get into this? And she was orphaned, and then she was adopted by this guy in Anukit City who had gone to the orphanage. I guess the orphanage had an apprentice day pretty much, where all the different artisans came through to try and find somebody to work for them. And this guy walked around with this vial and asked them what it smelled like. And she was able to clock that there was rose, but there was something else, there was a secondary smell. And so she got adopted by him, and he held on to her apprentice papers for years and years. And eventually we learn he wasn't outright terribly abusive. He would definitely abuse her, like physically and verbally and stuff. But it wasn't as bad as it could have been and not as bad as some of the other people had it. And so that's what she tells Steven. And his reaction to everything, she's realizing how traumatic her childhood was. But there's really nothing... like, what are you supposed to do, right? So she just tries to, like, laugh it off and, like, move on. But that was her childhood, was literally just working for this crazy old man who never wanted to give her her apprentice papers to, like, allow her to be a professional, because then they would be in competition, and it was, like, a whole thing. And she wasn't actually able to leave the apprenticeship until she married her ex-husband, and he bought them from the old man. It's a whole stupid thing. So she's trying to explain this to Steven. He acknowledges it, and then she asks him about becoming a paladin. And Steven tells her that he grew up in Arkenhold, and when he was old enough to lie about his age, he joined the army. And she says, "The army? Not a sock maker?" He laughed. And sadly, no. The weavers could take their picks of apprentices, and mostly they picked ones that looked easier to feed. I was big for my age and good at hitting things, and the army paid weekly and fed and housed me so I could pass the money to my mother. His mother. Having no relatives herself, it rarely occurred to Grace that other people had them. Yes, a family. Normal people have families, I must remember. What does one say? "How's your mother now?" "Dead." That went well. That's so funny to me. And so he ends up telling her about how how he was in the army, and he was going to be like a regular like soldier, but in one of his battles he got the pretty much like the berserker thing, like that power came to him, and so they obviously like shipped him off immediately to go and be a paladin instead, because he was like god touched. And so the army discharged me right then and there, turned me over to the paladins. I barely knew what was happening. I didn't know whether to be more afraid that I was losing my mind or that my mother wouldn't be getting my back pay. And they didn't give you a choice to turn it down? No. Well, I mean, I guess I could have, but once the battle tide takes you, it doesn't really stop taking you. You can't just turn it off. Once I woke up, my choices were very limited. Join the order or risk finding myself running berserk and nothing to stop me. The choice was easy in the end. Is that how it happens for all paladins? For the Saint of Steel's chosen, yes. I can't speak to any of the other orders. I know the Dreaming Gods paladins have to train for years to bind demons. It's easier for us. We just get pointed at the enemy and then the battle tide comes on us. In our heyday, we could tear apart every cultist in a room and not lay a fingertip on the prisoners. That seems useful. Useful, yes. We were useful. And then the god died and we weren't anymore. And that's all. His face was calm. His body was relaxed and his eyes were like raw wounds. Grace looked away and she wondered if he thought he was hiding it. She had a strong urge to go and put her arms around him, and that was absolute foolishness. He certainly wouldn't want her pity, and who was she to comfort anyone? Did your mother get the back pay after all? Stephen blinked at her, and a little of the wounded look left his eyes. Yes, she did. The temple took very good care of our families. When I figured out what it all meant, at the time, I was very glad to have been chosen. The front door banged. Grace closed her eyes and breathed intense relief before she had to ask whether he still felt that way, now that the god was dead. God damn! Sorry. It's genuinely so good. Margarite comes storming in, and she's like, "Oh, thank God you're here," to Stephen. And she says, "Guys, we have to go. There's something that we need to go and look at." And she's also like, "Hey, and also, by the way, Grace, you probably want to grab your little smelling beans. We're about to go somewhere stinky." So what the hell? So they hop in this thing. And the carriage pulled up a few moments later in front of a low stone building built tight against the wall itself. It had a functional, rather drab look about it. No effort had been made to soften the stone with plantings or banners. They dashed into the building, and they're going into the old wine cellars, which is where this guy, Dr. Piper, who I believe is the main character in book number 4. I think it might be number 5. It's one of the final ones. And it's a gay one. It's Dr. Piper and another guy. It's very cute. Sorry, people ask me all the time, like, there's really just not any like queer books that come up in this like genre very often that I mean, and really any of this, just in general, you don't find any. You don't find hardly any. So I feel like I need to note it when it comes up. So if you enjoy this, and if you're wanting that, obviously you kind of have to read the other books to get like a feel for what's happening in the world. Yeah, I would read the other ones to get some context and stuff, but you have that to look forward to. Anyway, so they go down and they see Dr. Piper, who is like doing autopsies and stuff. Like, he's that kind of doctor. They go down there. because he has the body of the boy, of the would-be assassin kid, and they're going to go and like talk to him about, you know, maybe what happened or like what was going on. And it turns out that he very clearly had another poison in his body already, and that's what took so long, and that's why it was such like a painful death. In theory, the thing that he had like taken the capsule of, it should have like cut his mouth and the poison would have gone in immediately and he would have died. However, there was a secondary poison already in his system that was like tearing him apart. So now it appears that whoever it was that had signed him up for this job knew that it wouldn't be successful and wanted him to die regardless. Like maybe they didn't trust him to actually end his own life. They didn't trust this to actually go the way that they had like promised him, right? Because he was saying how nobody was supposed to get hurt. And also Steven is realizing that that's why the kid looked so clammy when he first came in. They thought that he was nervous, but it was actually the poison already taking effect, the first poison already taking effect, right? So now they're even more confused about what all of this could possibly mean. The only other thing that they kind of ask is Steven asks if Piper knows anything else about the dead bodies and the decapitations and whatnot that are happening in Weaver's Nest, and he doesn't have any information to give them. In chapter 21, they're getting back into the carriage, and Margarite is saying that she invited Steven so she could talk to Dr. Piper firsthand about what happened, so that way he could go back and tell the bishop, because she's like, I know you don't trust me. It's fine. Like, you need firsthand accounts of these things that happen. So I'm trying to like, be respectful and, give an inch where I can type of thing. Yeah, it's just fascinating. And he's noting about how like ruthless that is. Like what a ruthless employer, one who didn't want their assassin talking. And she's like, if you're sending assassins, you're probably already ruthless. He says, fair enough, but there's a difference between sending highly trained professionals and sending children that you've poisoned for insurance. Two kinds of ruthlessness, I suppose. And she says, that's why it's not a Newgate City. And he gives her like a look, and she's like, I know that it wasn't a Newgate City. Assassins, I know the assassins they have, plenty of them. Something like this is too messy. They hire professionals. They've got them to hire. And so it seems, again, like somebody's like framing a Newgate City is like what she's insinuating. Still pouring rain, absolutely terrible weather. They're all hanging out though, and this guy shows up. And it's, his name is Duvalier. He is one of the, like, he works, and he's coming there on behalf of the Crown Prince of Charlock. And so the Crown Prince came to Arkenhold. He's hanging out, and the Crown Prince wants more perfume. And so he's there to, like, make a deal and ask for more, and Grace to make a whole bunch. And so she agrees to this. They're going to charge so much freaking money. Like, she's literally going to have, like, a year's worth of pay happening. Marguerite is just swindling this man, but it's the prince. Of course, he's got money to go around, right? So this is like a great situation for everybody. And Duvalier, very much into Grace, very much flirting and hitting on her directly in front of Steven. And Steven is like low-key losing his freaking mind. And, right, so he ends up, they make this deal. They agree to all this money and stuff. And Duvalier leaves, and Grace is freaking out about it. 3 years ago, I could barely afford bread, she said, to no one in particular. I was living on potatoes that were already sprouting and turnips so old that they had names. A rush of fellow feeling rose in Stephen's chest. There was something about poverty that was a little like war. Either you had been there or you hadn't, and it wasn't really possible to explain it to anyone who hadn't. I've been there, he said with more warmth than he intended. Grace held his eyes briefly, understanding, and then they both looked away. That's crazy. I highlighted that like on my first read through before I ever planned on actually like reading this for the channel or anything. I loved that. There was something about poverty that was a little like war. Either you had been there or you hadn't, and it wasn't really possible to explain it to anyone who hadn't. It's a very good like explanation for that sort of thing. So he finally leaves, right? He's going to finally go back and report everything to the bishop. And so now it's just Marguerite and Grace. And Marguerite is giving her a hard time about like, dude, you just need to go after him. Like, very clearly you guys are into each other. You just need to do it. And it's like so cute. But she's pushing back because obviously she's still dealing with this like heartbreak and all the trauma and stuff from her like ex-husband. So Grace has 3 days to get all of this perfume or scent, smell good, whatever you want to call it, created for the prince, and then they're going to go and deliver it to him. So in these 3 days, that's all she does. She's just like hustling, right? Trying to make a year's worth of rent in one single delivery. And Steven is going to come back on this third day, and he's going to be their like man in arms or man at arms or whatever, pretty much like their bodyguards as they go and do this. Because again, right, he wants to be around. He wants to protect them and be supportive, and, you know, saying that they're doing this on behalf of, you know, keeping an eye on this whole assassination thing that tried to happen. So, and also low-key, high-key on his end, he's doing it because he didn't like the way that Duvalier was flirting with Grace, and so he wants to be around. Like I said, when Duvalier was there the other day, they were like literally like sniping at each other and just like talking crap back and forth. So he returns in chapter 22. 3 days later, she's waiting for him to arrive. It's still pouring freaking rain and flooding, and so when he shows up, he is exhausted, and he's looking a lot worse for wear because of how hard he's been like hustling, trying to like help out and make sure that the city's not, you know, literally getting destroyed, even though it is. But they're doing what they can to like help people get out of all the floodwaters, clear their houses, rebuilding roads and bridges and all this other stuff. So she notes this. What? Oh my goodness. What do you need? Oh, you can't. There you go, buddy. Bye. I had the door shut. He couldn't escape. I was editing and I realized I didn't pay the cat tax. So everybody say hello to Kitty Kitty. He's a little grumpy, crazy guy. And he's very, very vocal. Oh my gosh. That's all. Okay, a hard cut to after shower. It's 9:30 and I'm trying to film this tonight. I'm filming this on Wednesday night. This is supposed to come out tomorrow. Obviously that will not be the case. This video will in fact be late. Life catches up to you hard and fast, which means also if you made it to this point in the video, I just want to note, I will be on my honeymoon for the next 2 weeks, so the uploads might be a little funky, obviously, because I can't even get this filming done. Turns out, getting your gallbladder taken out on the holiday weekend when you were going to film all kinds of content and get ahead for the month kind of throws a wrench into some plans. So... And then I've just been completely unmotivated. I've been in like a really weird funk ever since the surgery that I'm like still trying to like get out of. So yeah, the next 2 weeks probably aren't going to see very much content from me, or it's going to be like a minimal kind of whatever. So just a heads up, I'm alive. I'm actually alive and well. If you don't hear from me, the more fun it's because I'm having even more fun and crazy stuff on my honeymoon. And I'll tell you guys all about it when I get back. So I do want to acknowledge that, what to expect on the channel in the next 2 weeks and the harsh cut to the makeup-free wet hair Kaylee. So anyway, they're out in the rain, trekking through the mud, trying to get some of this moss. And he asks her if she comes out here often, like looking for this stuff. And she says, I used to, not here, but out of Newkit, to get away from my partner, Margarite. No, before then, another perfumer. We didn't get along very well, she said with a note of finality. Stephen watched as she wrapped her arms around her torso, almost unconsciously making herself smaller. He did a mental note to find this former partner and loom over him very insistently. Were you unhappy? Asked Stephen. Grace clearly had to think about it. I suppose so. Yes, I must have been, but it's so hard to say. I was so relieved, you see. She gnawed on her lower lip. To be out of my apprenticeship and able to sell my own perfumes. I hadn't known how I was going to do that, and relief feels like happiness if you don't know the difference. I'm sorry. I'm just going to read that again. Relief feels like happiness if you don't know the difference. I don't know what I'd have been able to tell you that. What? I don't know that I'd been able to tell you that at the time. It took distance, and I was still so close to it then. We're all very close to our lives. Most of the time, anyway. And then I wasn't. Relief wasn't enough anymore, but I'd been there so long, you know, that it took a long time. It's all right, he said, seeing her flush at the memory. Yes, he was definitely going to loom over that partner and perhaps gently express the thought that human joints were such fragile things. There's no shame in that. Isn't there? Asked Grace. It seems like if I was wiser or cleverer or had more experience or something. No, he was using the voice. He could hear himself doing it, but he believed it, and he wanted her to believe it as well. You can't blame yourself for not knowing what you were never allowed to know. I'm happy now, I think, she said. She clearly meant it lightly, but then the truth spilled out anyway. Or I would be, if it weren't for all these assassinations and bodies and documents and whatnot. Sometimes I still am, and it startles me, because I don't feel like I have any right to be happy when all of this is going on. You always have a right to be happy. Again, I had that entire conversation highlighted from like the first time I went through this book. It's just so good. What a good conversation, dude. And of course, like literally at that moment, they find the moss, and it's really, really high up. And he sees that she's going to try to climb the tree. And obviously this will not stand because he doesn't want her to get hurt. And so he picks her up and like kind of like puts her like on his like chest and was like holding her. You know what I mean? Like picked her up at, he like picked her up at her waist and was like, whatever. Within 5 seconds, Stephen knew that he had made a severe miscalculation. His jaw was pressed against the soft curve of her belly, and one of her breasts was actually resting on top of his head. Saint's bloody tongue, what was I thinking? And then he's thinking, like, beating himself up wise, about how, stop, you're the responsible one. You're not going to make love to a woman on a mud-infested hillside. That is not responsible. She will get bug bites, and so will you. And so she picks up the moss, she does all this stuff, and then, sorry. He goes to lower her. So Stephen set her down, or tried. In practice, this meant that she slid down the front of him, body pressed against his, one hand on his biceps and the other holding the knife and a bag of thready green moss. We did it, she said, beaming up at him with shared triumph. It was too much. His god had been made of steel, but he was only flesh and bone. We did, he said, and lowered his mouth to hers. Literally right at the 50% mark at chapter 25, they smooch. I love a slow burn. I love slow burns. It's so cute. So they're kissing, right? They're like making out. They're both like really into it. Like it's great. It's very, very cute. And then all of a sudden in his mind, he's thinking like dangerous. Whispered his mind, this is dangerous. The tide rising in his blood was red, not black, but it was too much alike, too close. He could lose himself too easily in the heat of her body. This was a tide that could wash away his past and his duty and everything else that held him back and kept him sane. If kissing her was doing this much to him, how much farther would it go? He did not know. And he wanted very much to find out, to let passion burn away the hollow, lonely places for a moment, to be with her for a few moments and not to be broken. Oh, and so he pulls apart from the kiss and he says, I'm sorry, that shouldn't have happened. Her eyes had been heavy-lidded, her mouth lifted in a smile. He watched realization slash across her face as if he had slapped her. He felt like the lowest worm in creation. Grace, I'm sorry, it wasn't meant to be. I see. Damn it, Grace, I didn't mean. She held up a hand. It's fine. You're not interested. I'm not interested either. No one is interested. It's not that I'm not interested, but what could he say? He's thinking, I would take you right here, right now if I could, but I'm afraid I might run mad and kill us both. That wasn't the sort of thing that put a woman you'd kissed at ease. And so they have this like whole back and forth thing that she pretty much ends up just saying, anyway, you've got a lot of nerve. I don't recall suggesting there be anything between us. You may have rescued me a time or two, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to fall at your feet. My life is very good and I love it and I don't wish to see it disrupted. And so she goes on about like trying to storm away. She ends up falling down and picks herself back up and stuff. And is just like so mad and embarrassed and thinking about how wonderful this kiss was, but evidently it hadn't been nearly as impressive for him. She tried to think about all the ways that she could have done better. Moved her lips more or done something fancy with her tongue, rubbed against him harder. Apparently whatever she had been doing hadn't been enough because she'd been 5 seconds and a good excuse from shucking her clothes off right there, and then he'd set her down and apologized. Philip had been right. She thought morosely. She was just terrible in bed, and there was nothing else to be said about it. Apparently, she was even terrible at kissing, and it was entirely like a Paladin to apologize to you for how bad you were at something. And the bastard still smelled like gingerbread. So I kind of hinted at it, but I guess to be like explicit, because there has been some like flashbacks and insinuations and whatnot about her relationship with her husband, was that yeah, he put her down a lot and like talked down to her about her mousiness and the way that she was in bed and how she like couldn't be satisfied and she wasn't any good at it. And that's why he like cheated on her and stuff. But really he just didn't pay attention to her. And it just ended up being this whole like, you know, you owe me kind of thing. And she just wasn't into it and blah, blah, blah. It was just really, really bad experience. And so one of the reasons that she has been so hesitant about pursuing anything with Steven is because she doesn't want to disappoint him, because she doesn't think that she's like good enough in terms of like physically, like bedroom wise. And this was just like the confirmation that she needed to like spiral in a bad way. And so she just goes like trekking through the woods, and she's like, I don't need your help. I don't need you to like help me get home. I've looked out for myself for years and I'm very good at it. You don't need to trouble yourself on my account. You're not worried for your safety. I walked here from the Newgate City with the clothes on my back and my cat. In winter, I'll manage. Stephen inhaled sharply. I see. She doubted that he did. She'd gone on foot in a storm, and what should have taken 3 days in a ferry crossing had taken 5. It had been a mild storm by Arkenholt winter's standards, but it was still a minor miracle that she hadn't lost several toes. That's a hard walk in winter. I was most worried about Tab. That's her cat's name. She admitted. I had him in my shirt and I kept checking to see if he was dead. Every time I thought, this is it. He's finally gone. You shouldn't have had to do that. No, I shouldn't have. But life is what it is, and I wasn't going to wait around for another asshole to make up his mind over whether he wanted me. Damn. Oh no. And so he says, it's not that. It's, I belonged to the Saint of Steel. I can't trust myself. I can't be trusted. It's dangerous. I'm dangerous. The gods forbid I trust a paladin. And then all of a sudden, she smells something, like really, really weird. And Steven has no idea what it is, because of course he doesn't, right? Because she's like this master perfumer. She really does have this crazy nose. And she's like, I don't think you understand. Like, this weird thing that I'm smelling, it's something burnt and acrid, but it's not. Like, I don't know what this is. And he's like, okay. And she's like, you don't understand. I don't know what this is. It would be like you seeing an animal and not knowing what it was. It's not a thing that happens often. Different kinds, different colors, different variations, but not completely different animals. Does that make sense? And so he takes her seriously, and she's kind of surprised by this and flattered. And she's like, God damn it. Don't make me like you. But he believes her, and he's like, okay, well, can you like follow it with your nose or something? And so she tries to, and they do for a while. They kind of like trek around, and she's just like not being able to really find the source of it. And right as she's, about to give up, she's like, well, I mean, I guess it's just a mystery. She turned to go and promptly put her foot down on a severed head. Uh-oh, that's not very good. So finding this head, he pretty much like rushes her out of the woods to get to the closest like guard tower, watchtower on the perimeter of the city as they can get, or like the nearest one to them, Rushes over there, they give the report, and then they go through like a series of being questioned and having to tell them about how they came across the head and all this other stuff. And he fields almost all of it like through the afternoon, but it wears him down being questioned constantly, because he's like trying to take the cover so that they don't bother Grace as much, because he understands that in her position, like being surrounded by these like big bulky men and being asked the same questions dozens of times over and over again and not being used to all of that. And then also, she's the one that stepped on the head, and how like traumatic that kind of is, and makes for a dreadful afternoon on top of already dreadful thing that happened earlier. And so he's just trying to like protect her from all of this, right? So he tells her, he's like, hey, that was like the second highest ranking guy here, or that was the highest ranking guy as part of the guard. He's probably going to have the scouts come, and that should be the last thing that we get. The scouts will come, we'll give them some more, information about what we smelt or whatever, and then they'll go searching. So that should be it. This will be over soon. Grace inclined her head, staring into the flame. Her back was sword straight, her chin lifted. She looked proud and so vulnerable that it broke his heart. He wanted to throw himself at her feet and beg to protect her from the rest of the world, except that he was the one who had hurt her the worst today. And the best thing he could do was choke down his own pride and find someone else to help her. He went to the woman at the front and made yet another request, which was he had the woman like send a runner to the palace or to the temple or whatever, to go and get Shane, his Paladin brother that we talked about earlier, to escort her home, so that he wouldn't escort her, since he's obviously kind of like fudged everything up, which is so caring of him and like respectful and whatnot, and like, apologizing and understanding that he done goofed, And so on the way, Shane is walking her home. And then all of a sudden, she's pissed, and she's a little pissy with him. And she's like, why do you all smell like gingerbread? Because he does too. And he looks at her and he's like, oh, the cinnamon and ginger? It's a muscle rub that our brother Eistvin makes. He says that it's an old family recipe. Works very well, but it does smell rather strong. The ginger is heating, you see, and there's some kind of pepper in it as well. It's better than camphor, which is what some soldiers use. A muscle rub. Of course, why hadn't she thought of that? It's not all paladins, said Shane, almost apologetically. It's just Eistvin's friends. Well, he does good work, said Grace savagely, as if she was accusing the absent Eistvin of a mortal sin. Shane blinked a few times and then said timidly, yes? She's like so angry. And he's like, are you okay? He said, fine. She growled. And she goes, and she like storms into her house and he leaves. And in chapter 27, Steven's day has continued on, like, into the night. Like, she got to go home and stuff, but now he's with the police chief, right? So they talked to all these other people, and then now he's, like, continuing it. And so Captain Mallory. And so Mallory is the last name of, like, the lead cop guy that's, like, investigating. I wanted to say the Headless Horseman. I'm not sure why that popped into my brain, but these decapitations and stuff. So they're talking, and Stephen had run into Mallory a few times and respected him enough to think that the man was angry about anyone being killed, not just the fact that the killer might now be moving into wealthier neighborhoods, but he also knew that the heat was going to be turned up on the man to stop it, now that people with actual power were feeling threatened, because they were right outside of like a more rich neighborhood. So it's kind of what I initially said earlier about like, the cop's a good guy and he's trying his hardest, but obviously everybody's like resources and stuff are stretched thin until you're forced to focus on the quote unquote bigger fish to fry, being the wealthy, powerful people feeling threatened. So they're talking about everything and, you know, this whole situation. When Shane comes back, says, you got her home safely? Stephen asked. Yes. And Shane looked at him, shook his head, and turned away. I don't know what you did to that woman, and I'm not entirely sure I shouldn't call you out for it. You probably should, said Stephen, to Shane's retreating back. The other man shook his head again, but didn't answer. Stephen sighed and made his way first to the baths and then to his own room, and his virtuously empty bed. Despite physical exhaustion, sleep eluded him. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying a scene over and over in his mind. Grace's face smiling, a little flushed, looking up at him with heavy-lidded eyes, and then the flash of baffled hurt, and then the sudden retreat into a mask of brittle indifference. He could not stop seeing it. And so he goes to Eistvin's room and like knocks on the door and he says, shrive me, brother, for my heart is heavy. Saints balls, said Eistvin, no longer looking sleepy. At this hour, did you murder somebody? He goes inside and Stephen reached for the chair that he knew would be there and pulled it so that his back was to Eistvin. Any paladin could take another's confession, but among the Saint of Steel's chosen, it was most often done back to back. That way, if you were on the battlefield together, you could guard each other while you spilled your sins before the enemy rolled over you. And I just love these little traditions and tidbits and stuff, and them like taking confessions to each other, and it's like a running thing through the books, where they'll do something and then like confess each other's sins to each other, or like open up and stuff in this way. It's so good. And so Stephen tells him everything that's going on, and he says, you got me out of bed for that? I couldn't sleep. He said, Eistvin says, so rub one out like a normal person. He says, Eistvin, it's lust, you idiot. It's normal. We're allowed to feel it. Yes, even you. I'm not going to grant you absolution for wanting to jump this woman's bones, and neither are any of the others, so don't go knocking on their doors either. And then Stephen's like, well, and then we found the decapitated head, and Eistvin's like, and you didn't talk about that one? You didn't tell me about that? Stephen's like, well, I don't feel guilty about that. I didn't decapitate the guy. I feel more bad about kissing this woman and making her feel bad. It's just objectively so funny to me. And yet again, Eistvin is like, dude, literally just go and find her. Why are you here? If all this traumatic stuff happened, like, you should be at her house right now comforting her. And he gives like a little eyebrow wiggle about it. I can't, said Stephen. You know I can't. I know nothing of the sort. I don't see what the problem is. The problem? The Saint is dead. There's a giant hollow thing in my chest. I'm broken. You're broken. All of us. We're broken. Eistvin shrugged. Lots of people get broken in life, Stephen. We're not special. Very few people had their God ripped out of their souls. I'll give you that. But still, if we limited loving to just the sane, undamaged people, the next generation would have about 3 people in it, and presumably humanity would die out shortly afterward. They pretty much talk about like Stephen opening up about how he's afraid to like be intimate because he's like, you know, what if this feels like, you know, the battle tide coming on and me being so passionate makes this happen. And he's like, oh, come on, dude. Like you haven't done it. Like if us, you know, getting off would set the battle tide, I think we all would have had it a couple times over now. And like, we all handle it just fine. Like there's something else going on. Like you're just finding, you know, excuses and stuff. And he also ends up talking about how like Istvan, I don't know why his name is fucking me up so bad. Istvan. And so then Istvan also reveals that he's like having an affair with the bishop. Oh my God. It's so funny. They continue to have like all this back and forth and whatnot. And the chapter ends with Istvan standing up, shaking his head. It's no way to live. And I love you, brother, and I want better for you than that. He stood looking down at Stephen. Go find someone else to shrive you, Stephen. I won't grant you absolution for wanting more. Oh my God. I won't grant you absolution for wanting more, like out of life than just being this like pretty much like celibate freaking paladin pity party thing going on. There's just some banger concepts and sentences in this freaking book, dude. So in chapter 28, been a couple days. He still hasn't talked to Grace. He's still feeling like kind of awkward. There's still like some weird tension. And so it's just like not good. So we cut back to Grace. She's in bed feeling sad and lonely and just like depressed over everything that's going on. And she ends up hearing these weird noises in the workshop, and somebody broke into her house, and her bedroom's like attached to the workshop. And so she's like creeping over to pin the chair like under her door handle so they can't come in and bother her. But the floorboard creaks and she starts freaking out because she expects them to like break into her room. But instead she hears scurrying of them leaving. She hears like the doorbell chime or whatever. And when she steps out, she realizes her workshop is an actual like absolute freaking mess. And there's a break in time, and Margarite has showed back up and she asks, was anything stolen? My notebooks, said Grace, and she felt numb. The magnitude of the loss was so immense that she couldn't get her head around it. In a few moments, she would wake up and this would have been a dream, and the stack of sloppy tea-stained book with pages leaking out of the sides would still be on the table. And she's thinking, I can handle this. I've been here before. I was here when I arrived in Arkan's glory and when Philip bought my apprenticeship. That was the wrong thing to think. Her vision swam and she remembered the smell of cheap paper and watery oak gall ink. The cheapest tallow candles, as she wrote as much as she could remember, knowing that she was forgetting so much, so many tiny fractional amounts. How many drops, how many parts per hundred, the head note, the heart note. Philip never saying he blamed her, but his disappointment becoming more evident with each passing day as she could not reproduce the sense that had drawn him to the old man's shop to begin with. Because when he bought her apprenticeship, the old man did not give her, or like let her keep any of her recipes or anything like that. And so she had to rewrite all of them. And so that was where like Philip's disappointment came in, and like the instant regret of like marrying her, because ultimately, right, he like pretty much bought her from her apprentice so that they could make money. Like he found her and was like, oh yeah, you're pretty much going to be like my cash cow, which is a terrible way to phrase that, but you understand what I'm trying to say here. And so when she could not leave with any of those recipes because they're proprietary or whatever, it went downhill in their relationship like almost immediately. And same thing, when she left Anuket City, she couldn't really bring much with her, so she had to write all of these books. And so these books that just got stolen are all of her like recipe books that she's built up over the last 3 years. And then obviously like they also took the really old book that she had, like the one that she's had since she was pretty much 9 years old, from the guy who taught her, the crazy one that she would get like the random quotes and stuff from. They took that as well. And so she's just like lost. She had lost everything too many times to have not taken precautions. They're still here, aren't they? She's thinking. Panic sank sweat slick claws into her throat. What if they weren't there? I have to go, she said, standing up. I have to go check something. And she darted to her room, throwing on clothes and ignoring Margarite's questions. Under the pretense of harvesting roses, Grace had wiggled through last year's canes and stretched a hand up inside of the mausoleum. This is out at the cemetery, so like where she was going to collect these flowers and stuff, she had like snuck around. And tucked up against the ceiling, out of the way, was a small slot that would have held a statue of the four-faced god. Her fingers touched oilcloth, and the knot in her chest loosened slightly. It's still here. I'm not completely helpless. It's still here. She didn't take the package out. She already knew the contents. 2 changes of clothes, and a pouch of coins. A month's expenses, 2 if she was careful, enough to get her and Tab somewhere safe and start again. There were 3 other stashes across the city. One was tucked in her neighbor's abandoned dovecote. One was in another graveyard, and the last was near where she had gathered the oak moss in a dead tree. She didn't quite trust that one. The tree was too obviously hollow and someone might find it, but a stash outside of the city was essential. You never knew when you might have to cut and run. Normal people probably didn't worry about that. Normal people had nice, normal lives. Grace only had her own life, and it had taught her that you took precautions because life changed too often at other people's whims, and sooner or later everything would be taken away. Right, she said. Right, okay. Not everything is lost. Not completely lost yet. You haven't lost everything. There's still Margarite. She won't let you down. As she had done too many times already, she straightened her shoulders and went back to picking up the pieces. Oh my God, this is so sad. So in chapter 29, Stephen wakes up and George is visiting. He is one of the dreaming-faced gods. He's one of the dreaming gods paladins. These are the ones that talk to demons or like dispel demons and stuff. And so he had gotten called in to like place hands on the severed head that they found in the woods to see if maybe this is like demonic work. That's like the only other explanation that they can think is like maybe the demon is like possessing people and bouncing back to back, or the demon's like getting power from these people, or I don't freaking know. There's some crazy stuff happening with these heads. And so they brought him in to like do his magic or feel it or whatever. There's no evidence though of any of this happening. And the only other thing that really kind of comes of his visit is that George was there the day that the saint died. And he was the one that Stephen had turned and attacked. And so George has this like wicked gnarly scar like right around his eyeball, and they never brought it up. Like George and the other dreaming god paladin that was with them was able to like subdue them and whatnot, and so it wasn't that big of a deal, and they've never held it against him. They've like never even asked for like an apology or really acknowledged it as a problem, because they're like, yeah dude, you're fine. It was like dealing with somebody that was demon possessed. You're good. Like we're not mad at you. Your freaking god died. We're not going to hold it against you, you know? And obviously Stephen just is carrying this like crazy guilt still. So we learn a little bit more about that dynamic. And then the other thing that happens is he's walking through like their training grounds, and one of the paladins, this is another one who does not have a book yet, and I'm so excited. I think he's the next one that's coming out. His book, his name is Marcus, and he's beating the ever-loving crap out of this like training thing. And so Steven's like, hey, are you good? Like, do you want to talk about it? Like, you're going through something, buddy. Marcus slammed the cudgel down again. Stephen waited. I had a wife once, said Marcus before. Did you know that? Stephen shook his head. She's probably married the blacksmith by now, has 10 kids. Stephen had his doubts that one could have 10 kids in 3 years, but decided that it wasn't the time to say that. It kills me, said Marcus. I hope she did. I hope she forgot me. Everyone thinks I'm dead after Hollowbind. It was easier to stay dead, but it kills me. Hollowbind was the like really, really bad. There was a bunch of paladins, like Saint of Steel paladins that were there. And when they had gone berserk after the god died, they like annihilated these men. Like the only things that were left, the only way that they were able to prove, I think it was Hollowbind, or it was another I'm pretty sure it was Hollowbind. The only evidence that there was anyone there other than the paladins was they found 2 left hands. Hello? And so obviously Marcus is like, well, if that's the news that got back, they tried to keep it like, you know, as hush-hush as you possibly could, because I think it was 2 of the Temple of the Rat people that came across them and had found them. And so they tried to keep it under wraps as much as they could. And so not very many people know the extent of what happened across the board when all these paladins went berserk, but there's still enough rumors and everything that happened and like had gone around and whatever impacted it, because even though they might not know about what specifically happened with the paladins that survived, they do know about the people that like burnt down the temples and the priests and whatnot of the Saint of Steel who went absolutely public bonkers, you know? So anyway, yeah, Marcus is he didn't want to show his face again. He couldn't go back to his wife. He couldn't tell them he was alive. Like, it's just better off if everyone thinks he's dead. So he's just coping with all of this. And I'm pretty sure in the next book, it's like him trying to like go back and find his wife. Oh, my heart. I can't take it. I'm so excited for that book, dude. But it's making him realize like, I did the right thing with Grace. And he goes and he gives Marcus a hug and tries to like comfort him and stuff. He says, go, we'll clean up. We have to be strong for another. I can't leave them. And the thought came to him unbidden that she had never asked him to leave his brothers, nor even suggested it. I have my own life. That perhaps their lives could have interwoven without consuming the other. And then his like guilt voice thinking thing, which is like his italicized thoughts. No, stop second guessing. You're where you need to be. It's not fair to ask a woman to fill the hole left by a god. It is not fair to ask a woman to fill the hole left by a god. That's crazy. That's crazy. So, cut back to Grace, who is waking up the next day still absolutely miserable because she doesn't have anything. And so she's waking up and she's like, okay, well, I might as well try to get started. So she's going through her like perfume orders, and it's taking her twice as long because she's writing down everything. A lot of these recipes are like muscle memory, but she's still just trying to write everything down. And somebody comes into the shop, and it's Duvalier. She's like, oh, I thought you guys would have left by now, but it turns out the rain had kept them for much longer, so they've all just been like hanging around waiting for the rain to clear so they can go home. And then Duvalier says, yeah, I fear we were supposed to leave the city today, but the crown prince is feeling indisposed, cold no doubt from the recent damp. And so he's like, with him indisposed and hanging out and me having an extra day here, I enjoyed your company, and I thought I would ask you for an afternoon meal. And she's like, you know what? I'm actually really happy that Stephen pissed me off, because now I can go and hang out with this guy and not feel bad about it. And so she does. So they go and hang out, and when she gets back from lunch and she goes back into the shop, Margarite is there. And when she tells Margarite that she was on this date, Margarite kind of gives a weird reaction because she doesn't really trust Duvalier either, even though there's not really much of a reason not to. There's just like some weird vibe. And so Margarite is also like, but what the hell? What about Stephen? And she's like, well, he kissed me. And then he said it was a mistake and he couldn't be trusted, that there couldn't be anything between us. Margarite is pissed, and she like loses her mind a little bit about it. But then she also says, well, at least he felt it too, like how good the kiss was. And she was like, well, how do I know that? Men don't panic and give you a speech about how there can't be anything between you if there isn't something between you. She's like, damn, okay. But Grace pushes back, and she's like, well, maybe he genuinely just like wasn't attracted to me and it was just an excuse or something. Margarite's like, no, that's not what happened. And Grace is like, okay, fine. If you think you know everything, like, what should I do then? At the moment, nothing. He screwed up. He can make it right or not. Anyway, the murders aren't solved yet, so it's not like he won't be back at some point. Or he won't be, in which case you'd be better off without him. I wish I had your confidence, said Grace. He's a paladin, said Margarite. They only have a couple of emotions, and the primary one is guilt. You'll see. A little break, and we go back to Stephen's POV. For 3 days, Stephen alternated between resolve and guilt so thick that he could practically taste it. He could not pursue Grace. He knew that. It wasn't fair to her. It wasn't fair to his brothers. He had done the right thing. And it got to the point that Stephen stopped trying to knit socks because it left his mind too free, and he found himself blankly staring into a ring of needles and yarn while guilt lashed him, and thought, I have to fix this. But this was easier said than done. What the hell was he going to say? I have to apologize to you and beg you to forgive me because I can't knit anymore, and it's making me crazy, or at least crazier. And so he finally decides, okay, I'm going to do it. And it was a long walk to the Glover's quarter where she lives, right? During which he prepared and disregarded 3 different speeches and eventually settled on, I'm sorry I was an ass, and seeing where things went from there. When he finally arrived, the door was ajar. That was odd. Stephen tapped on the frame and then pushed it open. He took 2 steps inside, and Marguerite lunged out of the back room. You're here, she said. Yes? He's like, what the heck? Like, what are you going on? And she's like, I don't even know how you got here so fast. Like, oh my gosh, it must be the rat. They have people everywhere. I'm sure somebody already told you. And he's like, what is going on? What are you talking about? It's Grace. She's been arrested. What are you talking about? Little break in the thing, and we go back about Grace. And there was a bunch of guys from the motherhood, right? The hanging mother. So it's like the motherhood people came to arrest her for poisoning. She's been accused of poisoning the prince. Uh-oh. And her cat ends up running away in the kerfuffle as they're trying to arrest her, and she's just awkward, and it's a little cringy, and so I can't read it because it just gives me secondhand embarrassment so badly. But yeah, she's like interacting with the guards, and they're taking her away and everything because she's a perfumer, and they're like, well, yeah, you could turn the perfume into poison, and very clearly you must have poisoned the prince. Like, this is what's happening, so you're coming with us. We're gonna lock you up. But in doing so, they left the door open, and her cat got out, Tab. She's like really, really heartbroken about this. And so they end up taking her to like an old guard tower, like on the not outskirts of town, and put her in there. She steps inside of this little room. It's not bad. It's not like the worst prison cell that she could ever have, you know. There was a table and a chair and a bed and a small privacy screen, and the window had a wooden shutter over it. But, she said, and the lock clicked shut behind her. So Stephen starts to kind of like lose his mind, but he like collects himself as much as he possibly can. And Margarite tells him like who took her, rather. You know what I'm trying to say here. She's like, oh, it was the motherhood. I don't even know what she got taken for. But he's like, well, do you think it's related to the assassin? Like them finding that boy that tried to kill the prince or whatever? She's like, pretty long coincidence. If not, there was a break-in a few days ago where a bunch of her journals were stolen, and I'm starting to think that that wasn't a coincidence either. Stephen's conscience did not so much as, what? Hello? Stephen's conscience did not so much needle him as a knife him. Is it getting too late? Is that what's happening to me right now? Stephen's conscience did not so much needle him as knife him in the kidneys. Okay, I feel like there should have been a comma somewhere in there, but that's fine. A few days ago, they might have had some warning, and she hadn't told him about the break-in because he'd been an ass who shoved her away on the hillside, and if he hadn't come here to apologize, she could have been whisked away by the royal guard, and he never would have known what happened. Hell, if Margarite hadn't been here. And so then Margarite's talking about how she'll, get the shop back in order, and then she'll talk to some people, and she'll, let him know what she finds out, and he says, please do whatever you need, but I think this time I can make things go more quickly. She says, oh, I believe that it's time for the bishop to meet Miss Grace. Oh my gosh. So Grace is like losing her mind, just like roaming in circles around her little prison cell room thing. And then eventually this guy comes storming in. It's one of the motherhood guardsmen, and throws this like paper on the table and tells her to sign it. And she says, I'm not signing this because it's a confession to poisoning the king. A look of chagrin flashed across his face, and Grace wondered if he didn't know that she could read, or if he had simply expected her to sign the paper because he had told her to. If you sign this, everything will go a great deal more quickly, and we can get on with things. But it isn't true. Things will be much easier for you if you cooperate. That's enough, said the royal guard. You ask them to sign, you don't threaten them. This isn't the boonies. We're civilized here. Chapter 32. Stephen and the bishop are on their way to this part of town to go and find Grace. And Stephen says, Thank you for all of this. I know I'm asking a lot. Stephen, she said gently, your people have stayed with us for 3 years now, and in all that time, none of you have ever asked for anything except perhaps to be allowed to push yourselves even harder. I know that the quartermaster had to practically force you to accept a stipend, never mind a wage, and that the housekeepers have to report when you have torn a sheet or broken a chair because it would not occur to any of you to do it. And I know that every single one of you would die in the temple's service without question or complaint. And so he's like, I just thank you so much for all of this. And she's like, this is already well within the rat, it's like the temple of the rat's job. Like, we represent people and we protect them and make sure they're good to go. But yeah, don't worry. We're seriously, she's like, I'm here to help you. Like, you're good people. Like, stop being weird about it, They show up to the building, they go in, and the motherhood man that's there is a higher rank than the usual guards, thought Stephen. And he's like talking mad crap to the bishop because there's just beef between the motherhood and the temple and the rat temple people. Again, like I said, the motherhood people are just a bunch of D-bags. So they take them up to go and see Grace, and opens up the door, and he goes in first to protect Bear Tongue in case someone's going to attack from the other side. But also he's acknowledges that it's because if Bear Tongue went in first, he probably would have trampled over her so that he could get close to Grace. Stephen did not know if he had ever seen such relief in another person's face, and his mind flashed back to Grace saying, relief feels like happiness if you don't know the difference. You found me, she said, lunged across the room and almost into his arms. He lifted his hands to catch her. Of course, he said, thinking, of course I found you. I'll always come for you if you need me. Always. No. And so Grace and the bishop, are talking about what the charges are and what's going on, and she's looking through the paperwork and, talking to Grace, making sure the accommodations are okay and that they're taking care of her well, and if there's anything that she needs. And, he tells her asking her if and the bishop also asks if somebody needs to watch the shop or, whatever. And she says, no, Margarite will take care of the shop. But she looks up at Stephen and she's like, if you can find Tab, please. He escaped earlier and we need to find him. He's going to get hurt or stepped on or like something bad's going to happen, please. Stephen had seen her nearly faint, watch someone take their own lives, watch an autopsy, step on a severed head, and discuss her arrest. And Grace had never cried. But when she asked him to find Tab, there was a tremble to her lips and a thickness to her voice that made him want to weep himself. And so he promises her that he will go and find Tab. In chapter 33, back at the Temple of the Rat, the bishop summoned the staff, gave them a bunch of like marching orders, and sent them back out like a deck of cards. And her lawyer is going to be this person named Zale. And I believe Zale uses they, them pronouns, or at least like they don't ever have like a, you know what I mean? I don't think they ever get referenced in any other way, which I thought was interesting because it's never said explicitly. It's just one of those things that you kind of clock, you know what I'm saying? The subtlety of it all. Regardless, Zale gets assigned to be their lawyer. They usually do I think like real estate or something, but all of the other lawyers are out, and so they end up being the one that is the best option here. So that's great, I guess. And then Stephen goes on his merry way trying to find the cat. We go back to Grace. She's again just like losing her friggin' mind in this room until Zale comes and talks to her and tries to figure out like a game plan of how they're going to tackle this, and obviously has to ask like, did you poison the prince? She's like, obviously no. They have this whole discussion back and forth, getting the game plan together about how they're going to try and beat these charges, right? And when we cut back into chapter 34, it's Stephen like digging around the entire city trying to find this cat absolutely everywhere, like looking everywhere that he could possibly think of. And he ends up finding Tab in the neighbor's abandoned dovecot, which also means when he's like reaching his hand in there, he found an oilcloth sack full of clothes, and judging by the sound, a stash of coins. And square in the middle of it, in a hollowed out nest, there was a round ball of the cat. And he's like, he knows what like an escape bag looks like, or like a go bag pretty much. And so he realizes that that's what it is. And the whole reason Tab is there is because it's her clothes, right? We made the reference earlier about all of her go bags everywhere. And again, the subtlety in which it's described, and that it's like, oh yeah, that's like the tie back to the other thing that's never really formally acknowledged. I think she does confirm that it was her stuff later, but she never really says explicitly to him what it's for. And nor is it in this moment explicitly said that's what it is. You know what I mean? There's enough there for the reader to know what's happening, but I just love that. Don't treat me like I'm stupid. And I never feel like T. Kingfisher treats me like I'm stupid, which I really, really appreciate. Grace has one more guest that day, later in the evening, like really late at night, and it's kind of weird. It's Duvalier, and he's come, and he's like, Grace, I don't know what to do. The prince, I think, is dying. Like, we can't figure out what poison it is, and we don't know how to treat him. Like, can you think of anything? Can you think of absolutely anything that this would have happened, and how we could treat it or whatever, and how this could have, how does he phrase this exactly? He says, I know you didn't poison him. I know, I believe you, but I cannot say who did. And the motherhood says that if I do not know who did, then I cannot know who did. And they're determined that you're responsible. I tried to argue, and she's like, it's okay. Oh, and he's like, I'll do my best though, but I fear that I've come here because I need your help. It's your expertise I need. If we can only determine how the crown prince was poisoned or with what, perhaps both of you can be saved. And she's like, I don't know anything about poisons. And he says, but you know perfumes. And if we work through this step by step, please. I know we haven't known each other very long, but I'm at my wit's end here. And so he's like, okay, well, if I just name off a bunch of poisons, like, can we talk through it? And she's like, okay, fine. I'll see if I can help. Help me think of poisons, and we'll see if I can think of a way that can get them into a perfume. So they go through talking about all this stuff, and then eventually he ends up leaving when she brings up Piper, Dr. Piper, because she's like, well, maybe he got poisoned by the same stuff. Like, she asks about the symptoms that the prince has, and it's very similar symptoms to what the young man had. And so she's like, oh yeah, if you talk to Dr. Piper, I can't remember what poison he said happened there, but maybe he could tell you, and you can get more information from him. And so then Duvalier is excited, and so he like scurries out, and she had done her best. There was nothing more that she had to do but curl up in bed that night, and she prayed to whatever god was listening to small perfumers that the crown prince would recover from his illness, and not merely because she hoped to live to see another day. In chapter 35, Stephen comes to visit her early in the morning. They're going to have the trial a little bit later in the day, and so he comes early to like spend some time with her and talk and stuff. And she says, I don't know how many more times I can start over. I've already lost everything, he said. There's nothing left to take away. He put his fingers under her chin and tilted her face up toward his, and he very much wanted to kiss her. And then right when they were about to kiss, Zale comes in and they don't, which is so funny. There was like a lot more conversation and them like, you know, bonding and opening up and stuff. But like I said, you should go and read this. The banter is so freaking cute. And so at the end, like I said, Zale comes in and escorts them out to through the courtyard, over to all this stuff, escorts them through the courtyard to go to the court to start the hearing and all this other crap. And she apologizes. She says, I know you both have duties, and I don't mean to be such trouble. To represent the accused is my duty, said Zale simply. You are no less worthy than any other person. Grace exhaled. I feel very foolish for having been arrested at all, she admitted. If I could have just explained better, that is very normal, said Zale, and also very incorrect. There is nothing you could have done. When the powers that be decided that you are guilty of something, it does not matter if you tell the truth. In fact, it offends them. When you are proved innocent, the motherhood will likely be angry that you let them believe that you were guilty at all. That makes no sense, said Grace. Not to reasonable people, said Zale, opening the door in the hall and gesturing for her to enter. Fortunately, that's why there are lawyers. Oh my gosh, this is so crazy. And so chapter 36 is like the opening arguments, which are them saying that she is a witch and she does a bunch of spells, and they bring out her books. They broke into her house and stole her freaking books to frame her for this poisoning. What? Frame her, maybe, or whatever. They stole her freaking books to use as evidence against her. This is ridiculous. And the judge is kind of fed up with it because he's like, A, this is all circumstantial. You're literally just accusing this random woman. You have no direct evidence. You don't even know what poison's against him. Like, he pretty much knows that this is like a bullcrap case that's coming up. And Zale says as much, you know, in a polite lawyer way and whatnot. And the judge is getting tired of like hearing all of this. But what can you do? It's not going very well. And the biggest issue is that with the crown prince being poisoned, even if it's not Grace, that there's a lot of pressure on the judge and like on like Arkenhold in general to find the person responsible or claim that they found the person responsible so that everything goes smoothly. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of like political pressure for getting this figured out, at least on paper. And so at the end of this initial hearing, really, and then all Zale says, so that was the opening statement for them. And then Zale's opening statement is pretty much, you can't prove she did it, so it literally could have been you, other lawyer. It could have been anybody in this room. There's literally nothing else that you have that would indicate. Like, you don't even know if it's poison from perfume. It could be poison from anything. Like, I don't understand what you're even saying right now. Like, this is such a waste of time. That's like the end of their statement. So they all leave, drop Grace off, and then Zale and Steven continue to talk afterwards. And Steven's like, they stole the books from the workshop. If they did that, could there be something else in the workshop that could like exonerate her? Zale says that it's worth a try. We might as well grasp straws now rather than later. Then I'll check, said Steven. He bent his head and brushed his lips across Grace's forehead and then hurried to the door. In chapter 37, Steven is walking home after scouring the shop, and there was nothing really valuable. Like, there was nothing helpful for what he needed to try to exonerate her. So it's late at night, it's stormy, it's rainy, it's crappy. He's making his way home, and he sees this like really tall guy and this kind of weird guy walking down the street. It's very strange, and it's just something about it seems off enough that he follows them down an alleyway, and he's trying to like tell himself that it's just because they appear to be really drunk, or at least the young one appears to be really, really drunk, and he's concerned about him. So he follows them around. He ends up kind of losing them and then approaching the alleyway from the other side, and then there's like a wooden fence between them. And so the couple, the two men, are on the one side, Steven's on the other side of this like fenced wall, and he's like looking through the crack in it and watching what's happening. And it's really, really weird because the closer that he's looking at the one guy, he has a smooth face, like doesn't look human. And so he's like, maybe there's just a bunch of makeup on him. Like maybe this is just some new makeup look that I just haven't seen before, and there's like just something strange going on. But the smooth-faced man brought his other hand on the youngster's other shoulder, and then before Stephen could move or even react, that too smooth jaw yawned, opened impossibly wide, and closed over the back of the other man's neck. What? It happened so fast that Stephen didn't even have time to cry out. At first, he wasn't even sure what happened. Surely it couldn't have been what it looked like. The man's mouth couldn't have opened so jawlessly wide. It was a trick of the light, or the youngster dropped. The smooth-faced man went with him, lowering him to the ground, and Stephen heard a series of wet crunching noises that sounded, the saint have mercy, exactly like someone eating a carrot. The man hadn't been drunk. The man hadn't been biting the drunk young man's neck. He had been biting his head off. I found him, thought Stephen. The thought was so bizarre that it had neither triumph or fear attached to it. It sat in isolation in his mind. I found the one leaving the severed heads. It was not a mask. The smooth-faced man turned and pulled an object, like out from under his coat, and the smooth-faced man turned the object in his hand, and it gazed blindly past Stephen. It was not a mask, something like a mask, a clay model of a head, perhaps. It looked like porcelain, like the smooth-faced man himself. It was hairless, and the neck ended in a thin, tapered spike. As Stephen watched, horror warring with equally horrified curiosity, the smooth-faced man pulled the headless corpse upright and placed the clay head into the stump. What? The clay man then puts his mouth onto the other clay. So the smooth-faced man puts his mouth on this like clay head thing that he just put on this dead corpse, breathes into the mouth several times, and then the head inhaled and opened its eyes. Stephen's gorge rose, and he fought it back. This was magic, and the bad kind of magic, the kind that no one could be expected to understand. Whether the smooth-faced man was a wonder worker or a demon or something else entirely, he didn't know. He only knew that it had to end. And so he leapt to try to get over the top of the gate, and by the time he leverages himself over it, they're gone. The body with this creepy ass new head and the smooth-faced man are gone, and all that's left in the alleyway is a decapitated head. This book got crazy, dude. And so Stephen just bolts for the temple to try and tell people what's going on. And when he gets to the temple, it's Zale is there. Zale gives him a tea that he was making, or that they were making, because they were going to stay up all night working on Grace's case. But obviously they clock that there's something very, very wrong, and they go and get the bishop and all the other people, and they begin trying to figure all this out, right? And the one thing is, like, by the time they get back to the head, there's nothing there. There was a very, very distinct smell when all of this was happening, and it was the same smell that they smelled in the woods, that weird acrid scent. And so he's trying to describe it to them, and he's like, if we just had like a sleuth hound or one of these other creatures that can smell really good, if we just had one of them around here, they could smell this and they could track this down. But it's raining, and it's been raining forever, and so the smell's gone by the time that they get back. And he's trying to at least explain it. Heavy, acrid, burnt. It was thick, and damn it, he found his vocabulary failing him. Grace would know better words. She could probably name all the notes and maybe even whip up a batch in her workshop. He froze, thinking of Grace, her downturned mouth screwed up in a scowl of concentration, her nostrils working as she tried to identify the strange scent. Could she? Or if she can't identify it, could she duplicate it? It couldn't hurt to try. I have an idea, he said. We might be about to set a record with the amount of outfit changes and like time changes in this recording. So chapter 38, his grand idea was to ask Grace, or try to like get it approved or whatever by the court, that she would be able to like create a perfume that would smell like what they had smelled in the woods, the like whole severed head thing. And then that way they could, give that to the sleuth hounds and go and track this down. Obviously, the like motherhood representative is adamantly against this, and so it gets turned down, and then they just like go ahead and press on with the trial. They talk a little bit about like if the guy who got his head cut off was dead, and Stephen is like, obviously, what do you mean? Why are you even asking me? And so instead she tries to like write down the notes as much as possible, but it's not really going to be helpful to anybody who's not a perfumer. And she jots down some ideas of maybe how they could begin to recreate the scent. The only issue is that like she'd have to smell it through each phase to see what needs to be added or whatever, and that's not really possible. So it's going to take a really, really long time, like days of somebody else doing like the mixing and bringing it to her and checking and altering and whatever, but that's the best that they can do. So the following day, they are continuing the trial. And on this particular day, the motherhood representatives say that that there is an additional witness that has arrived. And of course, it's not the crown prince. Our witness is the husband of the accused, Philip Artemizian, I don't know, of Anuket City. Husband. Stephen's first thought was that there was some mistake. He looked over at Grace and her lawyer. Zale's eyebrows had shot up. Grace herself was so pale that she looked as if she might faint. And so she was under the impression, right, she disappeared 3 years ago. She figured that he would have like just filed for divorce and like left it at that. So she doesn't really understand what is happening or how he found her or why he's here or like what the heck is even going on right now. And Philip goes on to testify against her, saying, oh, well, she was a good girl, but so odd. Normal people don't act that way, and she was so jealous. Always thought I was cheating on her with the other ladies, And Grace says, because she kind of like interjected a couple of times, like while he was saying some other stuff. And then after he says that, she says, because you were. Sounding less furious and more simply astounded. Lady Vance, Lady Morgan, that one girl you brought home to try to get me in bed with. I moved into the workshop because you kept bringing women home. The motherhood man cleared his throat loudly, possibly to try to cover this outburst. Well, there you see, said Philip. He gestured at her. Always jealous. Convinced. You see how it is. I bought out her articles of apprenticeship, I felt sorry for her. You know how it is. The lady cries and you'll do anything. I ended up marrying her. Grace went, if anything, even whiter. Her scarred fingers dug into the tabletop so hard that Stephen expected to see blood oozing under the nails. But then it was just one thing after another. Philip rolled his eyes. What did you do when she became jealous? Asked the motherhood man. Oh, hell, what can you do? I told her there was nothing to it, but she never listened. Did she become angry? Asked the motherhood man. Grace? Spittin' mad. Stephen watched the icy brittleness closing over her face. Well, there, you see? He gestured to her. She goes cold when she's mad. Normal people yell and get it over with, but not her. Cold enough to attempt to poison you? Philip paused. Well, he said reluctantly, I don't think she ever did that. But she did leave you. Well, yeah, she ran out on me with a valuable animal and half of my recipes with her. That is a lie, hissed Grace between her teeth. A filthy lie. Those were my recipes. You only bought my apprenticeship in order to use them. But you don't deny that you left him and took the recipes? Snapped the motherhood man, lifting his head like a war horse sighting the enemy. Grace said nothing. Zale was too experienced to wince, but Stephen watched them write the word shit 3 times on the paper in front of them in an elegant copperplate hand. The indigo-clad man's lips curved. In your opinion, Master Perfumer. It's so hard for me to say. Master Perfumer Philip. Would you say she was capable of murder? Philip looked at her and then away. Well, I wouldn't have thought it at the time, but when I heard about the trial, I can't say I was surprised. Soon as I heard, I said to myself, you had a narrow escape, my man. She always was a cold one. He gave the judge that sly look again, in every way, if you know what I mean. The mask of ice cracked. Stephen could see the raw anguish underneath. Grace bit her lower lip so hard that Grace bit her lower lip so hard that a thin line of blood sprang up, shockingly red against her skin. The tide roared in Stephen's ears. Oh no! And so he goes into this, like, not a completely blind rage, but he's definitely raging and gets up from, like, the, where people are, like, watching the audience? I don't know, whatever you call it in a court. And he gets up and goes, like, right up to the witness stand and, like, grabs the little handle thing right in front of Philip and is just, like, grabbing it so hard that it cracks the wood. And he's just staring at Philip. He doesn't even threaten the man, just like stares at him until he pretty much like pees himself. And then Stephen comes to and realizes that he's like about to, end this man's life. And Stephen calms down instantly because he's like, I just ruined everything and I just embarrassed Grace and this is terrible. And Stephen feels incredibly guilty because he has now shown the true colors of the Paladins, and even though they all kept it under secret and under wraps for so long about the tide rising and how dangerous the Paladins are, he just made it apparent to everybody in this courtroom how horrible he can be and how dangerous he really is and his people, and he's like ruined the brotherhood or something. Again, just this, like, you know, him and his little crazy guilty feelings and whatnot. So he instantly goes like, not limp, but he listens to the guards and goes along willingly, and he's just like embarrassed about what just happened. And so in chapter 39, the guards are taking him to like the regular prison. So she's in like the weird like guard tower prison thing, and he's going to the regular schmegular place where, you know, like the drunkards go and the, you know, guys that getting in like bar fights and all that kind of bull crap, like just the normal jail. And they throw him in a cell with a guy called Stinker. The cell was not large, and there was another man in the corner, or someone else had left a pile of soggy rags in the corner, one of the two. He could definitely see why they called the man Stinker. The smell was foul enough to cut through the stench of blood and piss and unwashed flesh that permeated the cell block. And he's watching this guy like move around really awkwardly and just like kind of looks like he's dead or something. And so Stephen says, "Hey, you there, are you all right? Is there anything I can do?" The prisoner turned his face towards Stephen, and he had his answer. He fell back a single step. Oh. The smooth man looked up at Stephen and smiled. "Ah," Stephen said. Even to himself, he sounded very calm. "I see." The smooth man rose to his feet. Another wave of rot filled the cell. The other prisoners shouted wordless complaints and demands that someone do something about the smell. Stephen registered retching sounds and cursing, but he never took his eyes from the smooth man. "Of course he stinks. That body is a few days old now, isn't it? I wonder if they simply ride around on the corpses until they fall apart, or if they take them somewhere else. For all I know, they might dig their own graves and lie down in them." "Do you talk?" said Stephen. "Whatever you are." The smooth man did not reply. His mouth stretched open much too wide, and Stephen nodded to himself. For a moment, he thought of just letting it come for him. It was no more than he deserved. But the thought of his body getting up and walking around, of the damage that he might inflict even after death, no. The smooth man reached out with his hands gone soft and swollen with rot. He had been fighting against it for 3 years now with occasional slips. He had held up well. But in the end, he always knew that he would fall from grace at last. One of the very last paladins of the Saint of Steel turned and embraced the tide. Oh, shit. What else are you supposed to do? You're literally about to be attacked by this, like, unhuman, crazy, freaking horrifying monster being thingy. Yeah, I think it's okay to go to the tide or accept the tide or whatever the terminology here is. Yeah, I would too. So, line break thing in the chapter, and we go to Grace's POV. They take a recess after this whole shenanigans with Stephen, and Grace asks Zale what is going to happen to him. He'll get thrown in a cell, disrupting the peace probably. The rat will get him out, it's what we do. Grace closed her eyes. The violence had horrified her, not because she hadn't wanted to see Philip beaten within an inch of his life, but because she had. For a moment, she'd wanted to cheer, and then she realized what was happening and wanted to leap up and stop Stephen before he did something irrevocable. But he'd stopped. He stopped himself, and his face when he realized what he had been doing had been a mask of horror equal to Philip's. He had gone with the bailiffs just as quietly as a lamb. Margarite will come," she whispered. "She'll set this right. She'll explain it all." She took a deep breath and shoved herself up the wall until she could stand on her feet. "She'll fix this." Zale looks at her skeptically, and then we cut back to Stephen's POV. And he's literally just like obliterating this like clay monster thing and ends up like bashing its head in. And then he breaks out of his cell. He like puts his hand like on one of the bars and his foot on one of the other ones and like pushes back against it and ends up like just like walking out of the freaking prison. Stephen walked down the line of prisoners, hearing shouts and then cheering, and then his heart was too loud in his ears and the tide rose up again. Cut to Grace's POV again. We're flip-flopping like a MFer in this moment. She is in the courtroom. Zale has wasted all of the time that they could. Zale stalled as best as they could. Even through the increasing haze of despair, Grace admired that. There was no way to disguise the fact that one of her character witnesses was now in jail, and the other was curiously absent. But the priest tried. Margarite did not come. She did not show up to Grace's trial to defend her character. Oh, no. And so in chapter 40, she and Zale go back, like they walk her back to her prison thing, and then they're like hanging out for a little bit. And she asks, she's like, "Hey, I can tell that this is not going very well for me. Let's just be honest with each other right now. What is gonna happen to me?" They turn to face her and put their hand over the top of hers. Poisoners and witches belong to the hanged motherhood. So the hanged motherhood are the ones that would be like doling out the punishment. like I said, they are incredibly like brutal people. And so they tell her you would be burned alive. Oh, she'd known that it would be bad, but it had all seemed distant and impossible. It would not come to that, surely. Everything would be taken away, but not like this. Burned alive. Zale grimaced. This is the coldest kind of comfort, they said. Rat willing, it will not come to that, but we will not let you suffer. We will slip you a drug of some sort so that you are not aware of what happens to you. Poison for the poisoner, said Grace hollowly. Zale squeezed her hand. I will do everything in my power, they promised, to keep you from that. Oh, because Zale is like, I know that you didn't. I don't know why I'm like making myself tear up right now. Because Zale's like, I know you didn't do this, dude. Like, you're such a gentle soul. The way that she has reacted to other things and just the way she talks in general and gets worked up, they just know that she's innocent and it's not fair. And this whole thing is like BS. And so Zale is taking this very, very personally, that they will, you know, try to get her out, on top of just being like a good lawyer in general. You know what I'm saying? And being one of the good guys. So they leave and she's just sitting in her room, just pacing around, thinking about how she's going to die. When all of a sudden there's like banging on the window, like the boarded up window that she has, which is really weird because she's on like the second story. And then suddenly the shutters break and Steven appears. Steven just busted through her window. Hello? He does not remember going through the window, which was too bad, of course, because of course it was the first thing that Grace asked about. And so he's like coming in and out of his like battle tide thing. And so he's just like showed up in her room and she's like, hey, what the hell? And he's like, I came to get you. We have to leave. She says, what? How did you even get in here? So did you crawl up? And he's like, I think I came from the rooftop. And she's like, but how? And he's like, I don't know. And he can't talk because he is like exhausted and like half out of it and just like woozy and can't think, and he can only say like a couple words at a time. And so they end up like, the guards hear some commotion, they come in, freak out that he's there. He doesn't kill anybody, I'll make that clear right now. He just like incapacitates them, you know, like makes them pass out, or he ends up throwing one guy down the stairs and breaks someone's leg. And that's like the worst thing that he does, is just break someone's leg. Super cash, super fine. It's like raging guy. And so she says it at some point that it just feels like, right here. Steering a no longer berserk paladin was like steering a good-natured but potentially belligerent drunk. Stephen was obedient enough, but he ran into things, and then sometimes he tried to fight them. Grace had to detangle him from a pitched battle with a rain barrel and convince him to drink the water instead. He seemed a little less groggy once he had gotten some water in him, and she'd wondered how long it had been since he last ate or drank anything. And so she's like, all right, they got out of this prison situation, and they're just like trying to find a safe space because they are like fugitives essentially now. So they end up going to the edge of town where she went to earlier in the book, with her little escape thing, you know what I mean? The cemetery, and then there was like the little temple, not a temple, shrine, mausoleum, whatever you want to call it, for the four-faced god. And she has keys to this that she got from the person who takes care of the graveyard. They go in, and there's a like loft area. I don't know if it's like and I don't care to look. I literally have the book open to the page and I'm not going to look at it. You can read it if you want to. It's the same place though, where she has this stuff stored in the little mausoleum or shed or wherever the hell we are. It's that same cemetery. But there's this like building that has a loft in it, and so they go up into the loft so that they can like hide and be out of the way. And she like gets him up there. She gets a little blanket that was like a cloth covering of some stuff and throws it up there for them to lay on top of, and he passes the heck out. And so she's laying next to him. Grace sat in the dark listening to him breathe and thought, I can go now. She'd rescued him. She'd gotten him to a safe place before he'd collapsed. She'd shoved water down his throat. They were even now, weren't they? I could leave now. Run to the next city, whatever it might be. Change my name. Tab's in good hands. Margarite doesn't care about me. I don't even have to worry about taking my books because they'll all have been impounded anyway. This is my chance. And also, I don't think I said it. Tab did get found. Oh, yeah, I did. So and then just so you guys know, I know you animal lovers out there are curious. He had found Tab in the neighbor's dovecote thing when he had found her other escape pile of items. He told her that he had found Tab, and now he, the cat, is staying at the Temple of the White Rat being taken care of. So that's why she's saying that Tab's in good hands. So she's like, I could I could go. I should go. Grace unlaced her boots and pulled them off. This isn't wise. You're only doing this because he kissed you. You're letting the lust do the talking. She pulled the oilcloth cloak back. Get out while you still have a chance. He's dangerous. He told you himself he couldn't be trusted. She lay down next to him and pulled the cloak over them both. The wooden boards were hard, but he radiated heat like a furnace. You can still get away. She closed her eyes, and the sleep dragged her down immediately. Oh. She ends up having a nightmare remembering thing of her husband bringing another woman like into the bedroom. Does not end very well, obviously. So she's having a nightmare about it. She ends up being woken up by Stephen, who's trying to wake her, and he says, hold on. He says, Grace, love, wake up. I think you're dreaming, please. He called her love. Okay, so he wakes her up. She's like, hey, oh, wow, yeah, sorry about that. I was having a bad dream. And he's like, you stayed. I almost didn't. She admitted it would have been easier to escape on my own. If they catch us, we'll be in a lot of trouble. They'll burn me at the stake. What about you? She felt his shrug against her back. I'm sure it'll be unpleasant. I'm more worried about the others. This is just proof that we can't be trusted. The other paladins? Yes. I'm sorry. So am I. Why did you stay? She's thinking. Don't blurt out that you're in love with him. Margarite might have abandoned her, but that was probably still good advice. Grace sighed, turning in his arms. Because it turned out I still had something to lose. He raised his eyebrows, puzzled, and she gave up and kissed him. And in chapter 42, they go on to initiate and try to, get it on. And we're at the 87% point in the book, right? Love a slow burn. So they're finally about to get freaky and whatnot. And she is very much like in her head about it because all, again, that she can think about is how inadequate she felt with her ex-husband. Or I guess current husband, technically. You know what I'm saying? And she just doesn't want to disappoint Stephen. And so she says that because she kind of like tenses up in the middle of things happening. And he's like, hey, do you want to stop? Like, what is going on right now? She says, I worry that it's not enough. Like, whatever I'm doing, that you'll think I'm not enjoying it. And then I start thinking too much about what I'm doing. And I see. This has been a problem, hasn't it? She was glad that the darkness hid her blush, and then he laid the back of his hand across her cheek, and she realized he could feel the heat. Yes, she mumbled, trying not to think of Philip and his demands and the way that any physical pleasure had eventually been lost in performing to soothe his ego. Stephen kissed her forehead. We're in an abandoned church on the floor, and if there is not a price on both of our heads, there will be soon. I spent a good bit of yesterday berserk. Frankly, I am more concerned that I will last all of 10 seconds and then fall asleep on top of you. Grace's laugh was half relief, but it was still a laugh. He laid a finger across her lips. Why don't we just agree that this is a trial run, and neither of us may be at our bests, and if we survive, we'll work out the rest later. She says, okay, and he says, okay, and then they get freaky, but it's great, obviously, because he listens to her, like, reactions and body and stuff, and adjusts, and, like, does whatever, and he's, like, attentive, and she's responsive, and it's great. And they both really, really enjoy themselves, and it's just, like, a good time. But this idea of, like, her being nervous and him just saying it's a trial run is so cute to me. And again, back to the fact that these are grown-ass adults who are just trying to feel good about themselves and find love and, like, again, this trying to overcome these feelings of not being good enough for their partner, and the way that they're coping and talking through everything and just, like, being awkward as they're trying to go through this together is so heartwarmingly cute to me. And so they do it, they fall asleep together, they wake up in the middle of the night and they do it again, and then the next morning they wake up hours later. The light had changed, so it might actually be evening by this point. They've literally just been trying to sleep off all this craziness. But he wakes up because he hears some weird noises, and Istvan pokes his head over the edge of the ladder, because right, they're up in this, like, the little loft thing, and there's a ladder. So Istvan pokes his head over and he says, am I interrupting anything? Grace is freaking out because she's like, oh my God, what's going on? Did they find us? Stand down, said Istvan. We're not under attack just yet, but put some clothes on. I'm a friend. I'd offer to shake your hand, but, and it turns out they sent out a bunch of the hounds to try to find that creepy, stinky monster guy thing, right? They were trying to find more of it. So they sent out a bunch of these hounds to try and track it down. But Stephen's scent ended up all mixed in with it, since they were in the prison together. You know what you're picking up what I'm putting down. They're just trying to find the criminals. ended up tracking him instead accidentally. Istvan was with them. Istvan was with them. Recognized the sounds of pleasure of Stevens, recognized his voice, maybe not the exact sounds, but you know what I'm trying to say here, recognized his friend's voice. And so he volunteered to like check the little building that they were in, and then told everybody that it was just a couple, you know, teenage kids causing trouble, getting freaky, or a couple of lovers just getting freaky, and everybody had a giggle about it and moved on. And so he covered for them, and then he came back. It's him and other paladins that are there to talk to them and collect them and whatnot. So they both get dressed, and they head downstairs, or I guess down the ladder, technically. And when they do, Istvan like officially introduces himself to Grace, and then she's like, "Oh, you're the one that makes the muscle rub, the one that smells like ginger. It smells like gingerbread. It's amazing." He says the ones with turmeric are better, but it also dyes you a bright yellow and no one wants to use it. And she says, "I would love to smell it sometime." Stephen felt a tiny pang of jealousy but squelched it. Perhaps Istvan would be willing to teach him something about scents, enough to be able to ask intelligent questions anyway. Oh. So as they go down there, one of the other paladins yells inside of the church saying that someone is coming, and it's the bishop. So Bishop Beartongue shows up, and she's like, "You lot are so bad at secrecy that it would make a spy weep. You stood in the damn courtyard talking about where you were going, and then you all ran off. I had 3 reports before the gate slammed shut behind you. Next time, leave in clumps and talk about it in your rooms, and you might get a whole hour of lead time." It's all of the other ones. They're all just there. They all left together from the temple to go and find Stephen and stuff. This is so funny. So it's them and the bishop, and they're trying to talk, and they're like, "What the hell, dude? Why did you break out of prison? What is Grace doing here? Like, I'm happy to see her. I'm glad she's doing well, but like, all you guys are causing so much freaking trouble right now." In the middle of the bishop, like, reprimanding them about all of this, another carriage pulls up with people, and it's the royal guard. So the royal guard is like the proper people the royal guard are the ones who technically arrested her. Like, the motherhood is the one charging her because it was a poisoning, and they're the ones that are responsible for that. But it's like the guardsmen that were technically holding her there, if that makes sense. So they're the ones that are coming to collect her to put her back in jail for being a fugitive. So they come and they're like, "Oh, you found him." And then the paladins all kind of like band together, and they're like, "Over our dead bodies, you're not taking her back. Like, we're protecting our people." And then suddenly another carriage arrives, and this time it's full of like the motherhood men. "Shoot them," shouted the motherhood man, bouncing up and down. "Shoot them all." The guard captain looked at the paladins. He looked at the bishop, who had her hands on her hips. "I'm not going to order my men to shoot at warriors who are just standing there not doing anything." And the motherhood guy's like, "They're criminals." And it's this very, very dramatic thing that's happening. And then another carriage pulls up, and this one is like in gold trim, and yeah, the carriage was gold. Despite the darkness, the coachman's livery gleamed with brocade. Brocade. What was the other word? Livery. The coachman's livery gleamed with brocade. What the hell? Anyway, it's not the prince. It turns out the door opened and Duvalier sprang out. Stephen growled low in his throat and stood up straighter. "Istvan, loan me your sword. I need to kill this man." "No one give him a sword," ordered the bishop. "I'm feeling distinctly conflicted here," said Istvan. One of the paladins, a woman with a curiously blank expression, unhooked a long dagger from her belt and handed it to Stephen. "Thank you." "Technically, that wasn't a sword," said Bishop. "I applaud your threading the needle there, damn it." The paladin smiled so fleetingly that Grace barely caught it. And so Duvalier, like, pops out of the carriage, whatever the hell, and is like breaking through this like crowd of people. And then he says, he said to the guard captain, "The crown prince is dead and this woman is his murderer. I demand that you arrest her at once." "Do you have a writ of execution?" asked the guard captain. Duvalier paused for only half a heartbeat. "No, it's not an execution. It's justice. I demand that you take her into custody." And so again, all the paladins now, you can like feel the electricity in the air that these guys are all about to like go Super Saiyan mode. And Duvalier just keeps pushing that she needs to be arrested and this all needs to come to an end. And the captain, yet again, keeps repeating, "You have no authority here. You do not get to give orders." Duvalier says, "The prince will hear of this." And the bishop says, "You said that the prince was dead. The next prince." "Oh, is he here too?" asked the captain wearily, because another coach pulled up. Bear Tongue threw her hands in the air and stomped around in a small furious circle. Another one? Really? The guard captain made a small noise of despair. A man stepped out of the coach and stalked toward the chapel. Yeah, so I said anyway, it doesn't matter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing gold-ornamented armor that managed to both be functional and elegant. The two men that flanked him were armed to the teeth in ways that even a paladin might find excessive. The man was dressed in warm colors, but the expression on his face was cold as winter. His boot heels rang on the wooden floor like a crack of the headman's axe. His gaze swept over the guards with their crossbows and paladins with their drawn swords. Grace recognized his face immediately. She had once spread perfumed oil on his wrist. It would seem, said the Crown Prince of Charlock, that I am only just in time. What? We're in chapter 44. What are we at? 91% of the book. We're at the very, very end. This is like the chaos, like, coming to a close. And he's not dead. Turns out Duvalier was like framing this whole death thing of the prince, and he was lying to everybody about it. Hold on, let me find this. Do I just want to read you this? I think I might just read this to you. You're not dead, said Grace. Her voice shattered against the deafening silence like a dropped glass. She felt her face start to heat up. But the Crown Prince snorted, and then everyone started talking at once, very rapidly. If you're not dead, Your Magnificence, you have impeccable timing, then who is it? What is going? This changes nothing. Icevin, if you please, said Bear Tongue, exasperated. The very large paladin cleared his throat, inhaled, and roared, Silence! Everyone quieted immediately. The Crown Prince put up an eyebrow. As you can see, he said, I am very much alive. Bishop Bear Tongue pursed her lips. For a man so recently on his deathbed, you seem quite healthy. The Crown Prince made a soft, scoffing noise. I knew I was being poisoned the first day. It seemed wiser to let my assassin believe they were succeeding. I put out that I was not feeling well, and did not allow anyone except my personal guard to approach. I drank only spring water and ate only fruit I peeled myself. But the symptoms, said Grace, bewildered. Your envoy, Duvalier, he came and told me the symptoms and asked me for my help to figure out how you were being poisoned. Did he? The Crown Prince's eyes swept the crowd. How very interesting. Duvalier, who had been inching towards the door, bolted. Two paladins, Grace didn't know their names, a bearded man with haunted eyes and a rather absurdly handsome redhead, stepped in front of him. Duvalier pulled a knife. The redhead did something with his hands, and suddenly Duvalier no longer had a knife and was on his knees clutching his wrist. The Crown Prince flicked his fingers. The two paladins picked the envoy up by the arms and carried him forward. Duvalier looked around wildly. Guards, this man is an imposter. Arrest him. The guards did not move. Now, what symptoms would those have been? Duvalier hung between the paladins in a sullen silence. Grace cleared her throat. Fever, vomiting, and blue fingertips. How interesting. The Crown Prince tilted his head. Tell me, faithful servant, how would you have known these symptoms when I did not stay poisoned long enough to develop them? Duvalier's eyes flicked from side to side, seeking an opening that was not there. Who do you work for? Said the Crown Prince. My brother? The envoy opened his mouth, then ducked his head and grabbed the chain around his neck in his teeth. He bit the amber crystal and almost had it in his mouth when the Crown Prince grabbed the chain and jerked it hard. The clasp broke, the crystal fell to the ground and shattered. A little liquid seeped into the floor. Duvalier's face, already white, went gray. No, you will not have a swift way out, faithful servant. I think you will return with me to Charlock, and we will learn many interesting things together. He nodded to the two heavily armed guards with him. The two paladins looked at Bear Tongue. This is a matter for Charlock, said Bear Tongue. We have no jurisdiction. Her eyes lingered on the Crown Prince's face. Though I hope you will not stoop to torture. And so they, just gather him up and throw him in the thing, and the prince is getting in his carriage, and they're about to get going. I guess that's it. The charges are going to be dropped against Grace because obviously she didn't poison him and the prince isn't dead. So that's all kind of like a moot point. So he's about to just vibe on out of there, I guess. And so she stops him, though, and she says, hey, how did you know where to come? Here of all places. His smile was genuine this time. Your partner, the short woman with the hat. I'm afraid I did not catch her name. She came into my rooms, for which I will have a word with my guards, and informed me of what was occurring here. Margarite. So Margarite was still around. She still helped her. She just saved her freaking little life just now. That's So crazy. And so then the motherhood people that are there are all pissy and like still wanting to say that Grace needs to go to jail or something. And Bear Tongue pushes back, and it's just like stupid petty bullshit. You know how it is. Eventually, everybody gets dismissed and able to go home. And by home, I mean Bear Tongue told the Royal Guard and the Motherhood that they would deal with it internally, since technically Stephen broke out of jail and did some other stuff, but it was like that falls under the Temple of the Rat, and so she'll deal with punishment for them and stuff. She, you know, just like pretty much squashes the whole thing, but the Paladins pretty much have to be on, you know, quote unquote house arrest for a little while she punishes them, and they have to keep an eye on Grace for a little bit. So they all head to the Temple of the White Rat for this quote unquote punishment and to just get like settled there and recoup and whatnot. So they get there. You're going through the halls and everything, and he says, "My rooms are this way," he began, and then he stopped. It had only just occurred to him that she might not wish to share his bed again, that perhaps the heat of the moment and the fear of death had led Grace to a place she would not wish to revisit. A servant bustled up. "There's hot water in the baths," she said. "If you follow me, Miss Grace." She cast Stephen a worried look over her shoulder. It's all right. A hot bath sounds very good. I'll probably take one myself." "Right. I'll see you soon," he said. And then, because he couldn't leave it like that, he bent down and kissed her forehead, hoping that she'd read whatever she needed to from the gesture. "In Saint or Rat or any god who is favorably inclined, I hope what she needs is the same thing that I need. And if it isn't, well," he hadn't lied. He had already lost everything. If it hadn't broken him yet, one more thing wouldn't break him. He squared his shoulders and turned his back while Grace walked away. In chapter 45, Stephen is woken up in the middle of the night by Istvan telling him that Captain Mallory, who's the police chief, wants to see him. He said, "Okay." So he gets dressed quickly, and there's like a runner that the Mallory had sent to come and collect him. He goes there, and at the edge of town, there is this workshop that is filled. Let me find it. I'll just read it to you. It was a small warehouse, as these things went, but even so, large parts of it were empty. There was a jumble of papers and blankets in a far corner, which could have been a squatter's nest or crude sleeping quarters. Slum weavers flew back and forth on the rafters, through a broken window high on the wall. Stephen wiped at his nose. The thick, acrid smell was stronger here than it had been since he had fought the smooth man in the cell, but he didn't smell any decay, just the heavy burnt smell and dust. Taking up about a third of the floor was a pottery. There was a table covered in white dust, a beehive-shaped kiln, and dozens of freestanding shelves holding mugs and plates in neat rows. "Come around the back," Mallory said, gesturing. Stephen stepped around the shelves and froze as if he had run into a wall. The shelves in the corner were exactly the same as the others, but instead of mugs, they held clay heads, placed upside down so that the delicate points rose up into the air. So, when he saw the guy in the alleyway, right, who like bit that one guy's head off, and then he pulled the thing out from his jacket, it was the clay head with a spiky neck that he like spiked into the guy's body, and then breathed life into the clay head on the human body, and then it like came to life and was able to control the human body and stuff, right? That's so scary. So they found a whole freaking collection of these head things that could make these crazy, crazy things come to light. These like dead body craziness. And so Stephen says, "Are they alive?" "Not as far as we can tell. We don't know how they work," Mallory grimaced. "We sent the sleuth hounds out and nabbed 3 of your smooth men, but it was actually a knoll that led us to this place. Caught the smell, and the guards took one apart and said there was a building that smelled just like this down here." Stephen stared at the row of clay. "What would happen if you put one in a dead body? Would it come to life, or is it more to it than that? Do they know what they are?" he asked finally. Mallory shook his head. "No one's seen anything like this. A rogue wonder worker? Some tricks of ancient magic? Your guess is as good as mine. I was thinking of golems the other day. All the stories about what happens when you don't tell them to stop. It's one of the things that we thought of," said Mallory, "but a golem head? No one's ever heard of such a thing. A knoll." And so the knolls are like these little badger things that moved into town. I haven't really talked about them at all. They get talked about a lot in the next couple of stories. It's just like another species that's just living among the humans, and they like help out and whatever. This one's on the police force. They have really, really good noses, and they're cool. Like, it's objectively very, very cool characters. Like, the gnolls are very cool characters that get brought up in the future books. But regardless, this one pops in and he's like, yeah, the Knoll is like, I haven't heard of golems, but you got to think like this is pretty efficient. Like golems are big beings, like very big, but not these. These heads is what he gestures to, the clay heads. He says, these are easy, small kiln, small head. And that's all you need. You just pop the head on a dead body and then you just have as many soldiers as you want. And when the corpse starts to go bad, you just take the head off and you put it onto a new dead body and then your army can just keep going. It's efficient. They're like, oh, I guess so. I guess you're right. The other thing that gets mentioned kind of in passing there is this wonder workers idea. And it gets talked about a lot more in, there are 2 books. Is it the Clock Tower Boys? I think it's the Clockwork. Is it the oh no, look at me failing. Clock. Yeah, the Clockwork Boys and the Wonder Engine, and it's like the pre-things to this story. So this is about like some great war that they fought forever ago, and it's talking about the war and these creatures, and the Wonder Workers are pretty much like, it's almost like scientists with like a little bit of magic. It's like part magic, part science, part craziness. It is fascinating. So technically, there's the 4 or 5 that are currently written in this like Paladin series, and then there's the Wonder Worker beginning part that is like the preamble to this, and then technically Sword Heart, if you've read that one, that's another T. Kingfisher, is in this universe as well. Not directly, but they make references in Sword Heart to the Paladins. It's so cool. I love it so much. I'm obsessed with this universe. So the Wonder Workers is just a super cool concept that gets talked about a lot more. And I think it gets talked about in book number 4, the gay one. The entirety of book number 4 is based off of like a Wonder Worker setup thing. So fascinating, dude. Anyway, so they then go on. He witnesses as they go through and smash these heads to absolute smithereen pieces. And Stephen is glad that he was there to witness that, because otherwise it would have like haunted his nightmares that these things could have come alive. Okay, that's really scary. And in chapter 46, Stephen goes back to the Temple of the White Rat and Bare Tongue calls on him. And she's like, hey, dude, you're on house arrest. What the hell are you doing just running off? And he's like, well, the Mallory called on me. I figured it, like, if the police guy calls me, I figured it was an exception. But also, I genuinely, I did forget I was on house arrest. Sorry. And she's like, and also, what the hell are you doing? Why did you go and break Grace out? Have I ever been less than reasonable in the time that you've known me? Do you really think that if you came in and said that you had an emergency and you were breaking Grace out of prison, that I wouldn't hand you a crowbar and a rope? No, Your Holiness. Damn straight. And Grace is in the room as well, because not only is he just getting yelled at for causing trouble and stuff, but she's telling them about like what's going to happen now, like their actual punishments and how they're going to deal with all of the drama that's happened recently. And so for Grace in particular, they are going to obviously wipe all the charges because she wasn't poisoning him. However, she did technically talk a paladin, quote unquote, into breaking her out of prison. And so she has to have some type of punishment for that. But the charges are going to be dropped against her if she recreates the scent of these like smooth-faced men so that they're able to track them down. So if she does that, then they're fine and everybody's even. So, you know what I mean? It was just covering the tracks and just closing loose ends. That's really all that this chapter was. And by loose ends, and so Grace's biggest concern with all of this was that they were going to like, you know, take her shop away or like take her everything away pretty much. And that somebody's still going to come after her. And Bare Tongue is like, I can't like absolutely promise, but I don't see a reason why anybody would. But you could consider keeping a bodyguard around for a bit, of course, if it would make you feel better. Kind of like wink, wink, nod, nod. You got Mr. Stephen over here. And she's like, she felt her cheeks warm. I should go. Marguerite's probably wondering what happened to me. Said Bare Tongue. She cleared her throat. That's another matter I wanted to discuss with you. Is Marguerite okay? She didn't get into trouble for breaking into the Crown Prince's bedroom, did she? The bishop pursed her lips. As near as I can tell, Marguerite is unlikely to get in any trouble for anything. Grace grinned. She can usually talk herself out of anything. No, said the bishop. I mean that she's been dead for 6 years. Come again? Bare Tongue tapped her fingers on her desk. The spy for a Newgate city, known as Margaret Florian, died 6 years ago. The body was identified by 3 witnesses. She was in a Newgate city at the time. What? I suspect that your friend is not Marguerite Florian. There is another spy from a Newgate who matches the same general physical description. They lost contact with her 4 years ago, and she is presumed to be dead or working for another power. Oh. So Grace spirals a little bit about this. It was too much too fast. Grace could not quite get her head around any of it. Margarite, an imposter? Did it matter? Why did it feel like betrayal? It's not. She changed her name and left her job, that's all. You did the same thing. It had nothing to do with you. She forced a laugh. How bizarre. Well, I'll ask her, although she presumably has her reasons. I suspect that it may prove more difficult than you think, but I've kept you two long enough. I'm sure you want to go home and not stand around and listen to me speculate. Paladin, Stephen, take this nice woman home. So Stephen walks her back in chapter 47. The workshop was quiet, and Grace opened the door with her heart in her mouth. It was clean. She'd been sick with dread, imagining what it would look like after the motherhood men had searched it, but everything had been tidied and put to rights. She wouldn't be able to find anything for a week, but at least it wasn't a jumble of broken glassware and spilled herbs. Stephen stood in the doorway. Margarite cleaned it for you, he said. When I came here initially, she was trying to clean it all up and put it back the way that you'd want it. Grace nodded. Her journals stood in a large stack in the corner. The alchemy tome was on top, no worse for wear than the time that it was with the motherhood. For the time that it was with the motherhood. They didn't burn them after all, she said. Not as long as they were evidence, said Stephen. Did the rat get them back? I don't know. Grace had her doubts. She reached for the alchemy book and opened it, meaning to look for another passage at random. Instead, the book fell open about a third of the way through to a thick sheaf of papers. My God, said Grace softly, picking them up. Oh my God. I don't know if the mic picked up that noise that just came out of my throat. What is it? The deed to the building. She had too many shocks today. She simply stared at it. A neat legal document, everything in order, her neighbor's signature as witness, Margarite's looping scrawl at the bottom. A numb feeling was spreading through her chest. Although I'm not sure how a woman who is 6 years dead signs a building over to me. The last page was not a document. It was a note, folded in half. I'm sorry to run like this. You've probably got questions, but there's a few too many people sniffing after me. I did my best to sort everything out before I left. I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye in person. Pet tab for me. I'll see you around. So Grace is obviously understandably upset about this. Like, her best friend just disappeared, but also she is so excited because she has her books back. She has everything, and now she has a shop. She officially has her own, like, house and shop and thing, and it's something of her own after all this time, after the orphanage and her terrible, guy that trained her and a horrible husband, and then she was just renting out this space. She has something of her own, and it's like kind of settling in for her. And so he offers to leave, and she says no and asks her to stay there with her. And it doesn't take them long for them to make their way up into the bedroom. And she asks another trial run, she said hoarsely as Stephen shed his armor. Yes, absolutely. And she says, oh, thank God. They, do their little spicy time. And then afterward, they're just, laying together. I'm hopelessly in love with you, Grace blurted out. He was silent, and Grace felt her hard-won peace shatter into smaller and smaller fragments the longer the silence stretched on. It's all right, she started to say when the alternative was to scream. I'm scared, he said. I love you, Stephen said. Probably more than is safe for someone like me. Grace missed the next few words because her relief was so profound that she thought she might need to use the chamber pot. I'm so much less than I was, Stephen said, sitting up. The man I was before. He deserved you. Now, he lifted his hands helplessly. I've never met that other man, said Grace. You're the one that I want. She scowled up at him. And anyway, I'm not exactly a prize myself. You're a prize beyond price. Oh my God. They have a little bit of this back and forth of I'm not good enough for you. Yes, you are. I'm not good enough for you. Yes, you are. I guess we are good enough for each other. Just, let me love you type of thing. As they're laying in bed enjoying this, the bell over the door jangled. Grace cursed. Stephen sighed and sat back. I suppose you should go deal with that. I can't have left the door unlocked, Grace began, and then she heard footsteps and cursed again. She threw her tunic over her head and stepped into her trousers. We're not open, she called, pushing the door to the workshop open. I'm sorry if... now, don't be like that, sweetheart. Grace froze. The warmth in her heart and her belly turned to ice. Her stomach clenched. Philip. Oh, shit. He, of course, has come back, groveling, and he's like, hey, I thought we ended on a sour note, baby. And she's like, get lost. And he's like, oh, don't be like that. I said I was sorry, didn't I? She's like, no, you didn't actually. And he's like, well, what was I supposed to do if the motherhood came and said you were being a poisoner? They just twist a man's word. I I couldn't do anything about it, pretty much. And she keeps telling him to get out, and he's like, whatever, this is a good place, though, here. The shop, you got good business, huh? She says, it's my business. Oh, no one's giving you trouble about the apprenticeship, then? Such a casual sentence. Such a world of threat in it. And if she tried to call it out, Philip would look hurt and say, don't be paranoid, sweetheart. I didn't mean it like that. There's no trouble, she grated. On the acceptance of a masterwork by the guild, I am free and clear. Been making masterworks, have you? His tone was dismissive. That's for the guild to decide. I could make it easier for you. I've still got them, I just need a reason to. I don't need anything from you. Leave. Get out. And then there's footsteps behind her. And it's Stephen, obviously. And he doesn't confront Philip. He just stands behind Grace in the doorway just to let her know that he's got her back in support if she needs it. But, he trusts her to handle her own business. And she's like incredibly flattered by this and happy about it. And he handles it really well, What more could you want in a situation like this? So she's looking at Philip a little bit longer and telling him to get out. And she's realizing like his hair's a little grown out and his clothes look baggy and he's not as well groomed as usual. And she's realizing, oh my God, you're broke. And it turns out he lost the shop a year ago. Oh no. And so he says that he'll like do the divorce papers and stuff. She doesn't have to worry about it. Fine. I guess we're divorced then. And then Stephen, comforts her a little bit, and then eventually he's gonna go home for the night and asks, would you wish to see me tomorrow? And she says, I would like that, said Grace, and meant it. After the door had closed and she had locked it firmly, she stood in her workshop. It felt oddly empty. There was no Margarite, nor any chance of her return, and even Tab was still at the temple. And yet, it's mine, my place. It hasn't been taken away. She sat down on the chair in silence and breathed the air, the mix of scents, spilled oil, and burnt wood. Hers, her own. Nothing that she needed to think about or worry about. No one to ask anything and require a response. She took another deep breath and felt her shoulders loosen just a little. I wanted my normal life back, and it's here. Not quite the same, maybe, but here. She lit the burner and she set to work. Stephen came back the next day carrying Tab, who was very upset about being carried, but when he realized where he was incredibly grateful. And Stephen greets her, and it's very, very cute. And then they just kind of have this like awkward moment where they're just like kind of staring at each other. And what happens now? She asked. Stephen shifted his feet. Chain clinked softly as he moved. He did not pretend that she was talking about the next 5 minutes or about Tab or his back hurting or anything but the two of them. I could not leave my brothers, he said. They need me. He stared down at his hands. We need each other. And I can't leave my shop, said Grace. This is what I do. She was also staring at her hands, thinking about how relieved she had been to be alone last night, but also how peaceful it had been that first day when he sat knitting in her workshop. Could it work? Could two people who generally worked alone in silence manage to work in silence together? We do live in the same city, she said cautiously. We do. He cleared his throat. It's not a long walk from the temple. I suspect I could do it several times a week at least if my back doesn't go out. They both looked up at the same time and met each other's eyes. Could your brothers spare you that much time? I expect they could manage. Could you take so much time from your work? A surprising amount of my work is letting things simmer for hours at a time. A smile slowly broke across his face. Well then, if you do not mind the company while you work. He reached into his pack and pulled out a ball of finely spun yarn with needles already stuck into it. I don't suppose you might need another pair of socks? And that's how the book ends. Isn't that so endearing? That is literally like the cutest ending ever I've ever heard in my entire life. It's so precious. It's literally so precious. I love this book so much. I love this series so much, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that I can convince you to read it and to read the rest of the series. And really any of these, like I said, Sword Heart, the other ones by T. Kingfisher, this is completely different. She also does like the spooky ones, she has like the What Moves the Dead and Nettle and Bone and those books and whatnot. And those are so much more popular. And I don't understand how. Nettle and Bone, that's the other one. I haven't read those ones, so maybe they are like significantly better or whatever. But I don't understand how her books haven't blown up for this. It's not fantasy. fantasy adjacent, I guess, because there is magic and like there's stuff, but it's just so good. It's so good. I was so happy to be reading this again, and I was so happy to be telling you guys about it. Oh my god, the way that I need to reread all of the other books in the series. Oh. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for watching and all the support on this channel. I literally cannot say it enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.